Party on, Garth.
There you go. What's
you're
up?
You're supposed to say party on, Wayne.
Party on, Wayne.
Hey, Derek, how you doing?
What's up?
What's up? I am here. It's Labor Day. I can't say it's a lovely day. It's pretty overcast, kind of wet today. But yeah, I'm just chilling, just doing a stream. I'm happy you're here.
Yeah, I'm thankful that you invited me here. Nobody invites me anymore on anyone's podcast or any shows.
Really?
I'm just a nobody.
That's sad.
I know it's a lonely world in which I live, but I have been working. I just came off of a long 2-hour recording with Jason Staples. And then I was like, hey, I have these promises I've made to a dear friend who wants me to come on and be a sounding board, I guess you'd say, in a way. What is my role today, Dr. Kip Davis?
Now I think your role, Derek, is to keep it real.
Okay.
So like a lot of the things we're going to talk about today, for those of you who don't know, and I didn't really do a proper introduction here. I'm Kip Davis. Welcome to my channel. It's Monday, it's Labor Day, and it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon Pacific time. I'm a Hebrew Bible scholar and a specialist in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I was on holidays 2 weeks ago when a video by the Godless Engineer dropped, in which he refitted and pieces of an interview that he did with eminent Talmud, rabbinic, and Jewish literature scholar from, it's either Stanford or Berkeley. I think it's Berkeley. Dr. Daniel Boyarin. If someone can correct me in the chat on that, I would appreciate it. So he dropped this interview, or this video, which cut pieces from this interview. And I don't, as a rule, and I never have made a response to any of my work, but I thought this was kind of important today, just in an effort to sort of help people to understand this stuff, because it can be really complicated. And I think that's part of your role here when I say keeping it real. It's nice to have someone who's not necessarily immersed in this stuff at an intimate level to bounce things off of, just so that I get a clear sense that I'm speaking intelligible English, that people get the concepts, that they understand the issues. So
well, I'm dumb enough to speak normal, but also smart enough to be dumb in the arena of smart people. And so I feel like I am a mediator to humanity that's been sent here, maybe by the demiurge or the good God, like the evil one or the good one. I don't know which one. It doesn't matter. Does it really matter? Come on.
You are the conduit between the biblical studies cabal and the unwashed masses.
The elemental spirits have sent me. No,
well, but that's good. So you're perfect.
Should we just quickly say, what the heck? Why are you even responding? Like, why is he doing a video on you? And for those who may not know any of the background, it seems that there seems to be a back and forth ever since you and Dr. Richard Carrier have kind of clashed about Judaism. You've made some critiques, and he has responded in some ways, but I know that in videos he's appeared with John on. And I'm friends with Richard Carrier, and I've had him on my channel, and I still will in the future, where I learn about ideas and stuff from him, because he's a very sharp guy, even if you say he's wrong on certain things, and you've made your cases as to why. I want to hear what's going on with John and you based on this video response, because my background to this is that you contacted me and said, dude, did you see this response? I said, no, I haven't. And then you said, well, it's kind of a dishonest video, very leading with questions, almost like the scholar that he interviews himself doesn't really even realize what's happening in terms of the way that John's using his words or his work. And so if there's anything I'm a professional at, is communication and interview skills, and to know what I'm doing and to lay my cards out on the table of what my motives are, my bias, what I'm trying to do. So that's something you teased me on, but I have not watched it yet, as I promised I wouldn't until you showed it to me. So,
well, that's good. And I appreciate it. And just by way of background, what we're going to be talking about today, I have included a link to John's video interview, or the video he made from the interview, in the description. And he poses a number of questions to Professor Daniel Boyarin, about specifically the text of Isaiah chapter 53, the messianic interpretations of it within Judaism, the understanding of what a Messiah is in early Judaism. But as I will show in a few places here, and as we'll talk through, it's cut in such a way as if Dr. Boyarin is responding directly to me, even though my name was never mentioned in the interview. And then John has also cut the video in such a way as suggesting that he's taken statements that I've made and content from some of the things that I've done online, responding to Carrier's work, and has framed them in such a way as if these are responses to Professor Boyarin. Because one of the things that Carrier does pretty consistently is he will say, "I'm just citing the experts. I'm just citing this stuff. So if my critics have any problem with me or with this citation of material, it's not me. It's actually this other scholar that their issue is with. It's a tactic, right? And it's not a very, I would say it's not a good faith tactic. Because one of my contentions throughout, and this is something we can talk about as we go through the video and chat through the afternoon. One of my contentions is that I don't think Carrier seems to clearly understand everything that Boyarin is arguing in his book, The Jewish Gospels, and by extension, I would say John doesn't seem to clearly understand some of this stuff too. So that's where we are. That's where we're going. Guys, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to post those into the chat. I can't guarantee that I will see them all, because I'm and I want to give a shout out here to my terrific producer Vishanti, who is unable to be here today. I believe she's at San Diego Comic-Con. I think it's San Diego Comic-Con.
okay.
She sent me pictures of her at Comic-Con with Forrest Valkai and with our mutual friend Dr. Dan McClellan. So that's pretty cool, right? So anyways, Vishanti usually runs the things and I just talk. But sadly, because she's not here, I'm going to have to run all the things and do the talking
Life is
too.
so hard. Life is
It's
so hard.
very hard. How do you do this, Derek?
Look,
it's crazy.
while I know how to do this stuff, everything else in my life, my wife, the queen of myth vision, literally, I don't know what I would do without her, so I do understand where you're coming from. It's just, I got really good at this StreamYard thing and multitasking and then getting the Q&A and all that. Like, I figured out how to do that really well over the years, because at one point I was streaming every day. You kind of have to.
Yeah. Yes, I see that. Yeah. Practice makes perfect, right? So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, I did want to say, look, this is I think the first time I've seen you in your new studio setup here. It's looking nice, looking very austere.
You know what? It's got all sorts of fabulous books behind me. Maybe not. Obviously, I'm in the corner of a room, got the new office set up, and it is my own little room, but I
Ooh,
love this place. And yeah,
cool.
it's nice.
So
I'm ready
sweet.
when you
Well,
are, though.
that's great. Yeah,
Look,
let's do
highlight
this.
stuff to me that you recognize too, and I might
Yeah,
jump in.
absolutely. Okay. So, yeah, just before we start here, just want to give a shout out. Matthew K, who has been a channel member for 4 months, says, "I'm sorry, Kip. I'm not sure we can be friends anymore. You can't be a true scholar without the original Greek. Much love, Kip and Derek." Well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to lose your friendship now, Matthew. I'm starting to feel like I should probably add tiny violin sounds to
Yes.
my repertoire here, because lately I feel like I've been needing them. So and I just hey, Stephanie has become a member. Thank
Oh,
you, Stephanie. Woo! I have channel memberships,
oh,
guys. So keep your eyes on that. Yes. So if you have questions, the best way to make sure we see them is to super chat them. But without further ado, why don't we take a look at this video response that John did from his interview with Dr. Boyarin, and I'll be jumping back and forth a little bit between his video, and I've got some slides
okay.
because I love slides. So that's how we'll do this. All right. So I'm going to bring it up. Everyone can see it okay. I'm going to put us down here, Derek. Look at that. All right. Ready to go? Here we
I'm
go.
ready.
Please, everyone, give me a shout out if you can hear it. Derek, you could let me know if you can hear it too.
In today's video, we're gonna hear
Is it
Dr.
good?
Daniel Boyarin respond directly
All right.
to a number of the claims made by Dr. Kip Davis. And these are going to be claims and statements made about Dr. Boyarin's scholarship. While Dr. Kip prefers to represent this as Dr. Carrier's scholarship, Dr. Carrier has merely cited the experts on these topics.
So, just right from the get-go, and I already mentioned something about this, right? I think it's important to point out that I certainly do disagree with Professor Boyarin in terms of how he's connecting traditions in the Talmud to the much earlier Second Temple period. That's where his and my biggest disagreement lies.
Mhm.
Um, but my issues with this video are about how Carrier is reading Boyarin, and then by extension, how Godless Engineer is reading Boyarin. And since both of them are non-experts in early Jewish literature, in Second Temple Judaism, one really must always raise questions about how accurate and careful they are with their source citations. So, as I said, Carrier claims that he's just following what scholars are saying about any given issue, but there are several times when this has been demonstrated. You can watch some of my videos to see that this has been demonstrated to be just plainly false, incomplete, or one-sided. And this is one of these situations, right? So I'm just going to continue.
Yep.
First, we will discuss what a Messiah is in pre-Christian Judaism. Dr. Kip Davis has a lot of issues with the context that Dr. Carrier places this concept of a Messiah in for the purposes of On the Historicity of Jesus. Most notably, it's the definition of what a Messiah is.
For example, with regards to the term Messiah, he says...
Hold on. So, Derek, I want you to pay really close attention, and everyone in the chat. I'm going to this is from one of my videos. where I read out the definition that Richard Carrier has provided for Messiah. I want you to pay really, really close attention to what he says a Messiah is. And then we're going to have to kind of remember that when John presents this definition to Professor Boyarin to get his feedback on that, okay? So pay close attention to this definition here, all right?
As this, I shall mean by Messiah the Hebrew word of which Christ is a translation. Any man, in fact, myth or prophecy who is A, anointed by the Hebrew God to B, play a part in God's plan to liberate his chosen people from their oppressors, and C, restore or institute God's true religion. This means anointed in any sense then understood, literally, figuratively, cosmically, or symbolically. Liberate in any sense then claimed, physically or spiritually. Oppressors in any sense then identified, whoever or whatever that may be, and religion in the fullest sense, cults, mores, sacred knowledge, and the resulting social order. And I specify only play a part, not necessarily bring to fruition. All Jewish kings and high priests were, of course, messiahs in the basic sense of being anointed to represent God. In the broad strokes, he's not wrong. But the primary problem here is this is not so narrowly how Jews understood the term Mashiach. Even as late as the early 2nd century, when the book of Daniel was written, he very clearly only understood this to mean the office of the ruling high priest when the term was used. Like this idea from within his book is that this term, Mashiach, which means anointed one, which comes to mean Messiah, within the Dead Sea Scrolls, far and away, most of the time, this is with reference to prophets. This is just a way you talk about prophets. It's interesting when you read the scrolls because you start seeing Mashiachim, the plural form, you start seeing messiahs popping up all over the place. It's a fairly well-used term, and based on Jason's research, by and large, this is meant to indicate prophets of Yahweh as anointed figures. The word itself just means anointed one, right?
Well, I'm
going to pause it there for a second, Derek, and maybe bring you back on the stage here. Let's take that away for a second.
Okay.
So, were you following? Now this is John's cut. So he put the definition that I read and some of my disagreement with it at the start there, and then he found this clip from an interview I did, I think last year on Deep Jerk's podcast, where I was discussing some of these things, and in this clip I was describing what the term Mashiach, from which we get the word Messiah, how this word functions within the Dead Sea Scrolls. Were you able to follow that? Was that
it
kind of clear?
sounded to me, my takeaway is that you are using in a broader sense that it doesn't just have the Messiah as we have in mind. It has broader implications, like Cyrus was, called a Messiah. He wasn't even Jewish. Here's this foreign king called a Messiah. So Messiah functions in many ways, and it's not always like what we have perceived as Christianity with Jesus. One could even argue that Paul plays a form of a Messiah because he sees himself as a prophet in the last days. So of course he's not the Christ, but he plays a Christ-like role in many ways. So,
and this is kind of part of the point, like the point of what I was talking about in that second clip there. I was specifically talking, I said at the beginning, this is how the word functions within the Dead Sea Scrolls. I probably I overstated it a little bit. In that, yes, the term Mashiach in the scrolls is used to describe like the divine human figure who is going to come and institute God's rule in the end of in the last days. it is still used to describe anointed leaders, but one of the ways that it's used with pretty significant frequency is to describe prophets, in particular what Jewish readers of this time period would have called the former prophets, the Hebrew prophets. So these were the prophets from the Hebrew Bible. So that's kind of what I'm getting at. But I think it's important to clarify that and to put some attention on that, because GE is going to ask Professor Boyarin a question about the way I presented the definition there, the way I presented the word relative to what's happening in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, so we're just going to continue.
Had the opportunity to ask Dr. Daniel Boyarin himself about Dr. Carrier's definition of a Messiah in this context. Here is what he had to say about it. Would you consider this definition of a Messiah to be maybe too narrowly defined as far as the understanding of pre-Christian Jewish tradition, that the Messiah would be an anointed person by the Hebrew God? He would play a part in God's plan to liberate his chosen people from their oppressors and to restore or institute God's true religion.
Or God's true rule of the world.
Right.
Okay. So I'm gonna pull that back again. Did you catch how John presented Carrier's definition to Professor Boyarin?
So if I were to do it purely on a professional interviewee type thing, he's clearly wanting the guy to favor this whatever he's bringing to him. By the way, he's like, is it too narrow, or are you open to this being the case? And I don't see any problem with what he did there, but the definition was a lot smaller than what you said. So what are you catching, or what am I missing?
Well, should we look at what the definition is again? I think that's useful. So let me just pull up my slides here. This is going to take me just a second. All right. Share the entire screen. There we go. Okay. I gotta put that on the stage. All right. Okay. So here's the entire definition again.
Mm-hmm.
That's it there.
Right.
Now this is what John said. This is the definition that John presented to Professor Boyarin. That the Messiah would be an anointed person by the Hebrew God, that he would play a part in God's plan to liberate his chosen people from their oppressors and to restore or institute God's true religion or God's true rule in the world. There's a few things missing from that presentation of a definition. Based on do you want me to show you what's missing?
Yeah, show me what's missing.
So all of the red stuff is missing. So he does not talk about him as being a man in fact, myth, or prophecy, which I think is an important feature of Carrier's definition. And then he skips all this stuff about anointed, meaning in any sense then understood literally, figuratively, cosmically, or symbolically, liberate in any sense then claimed, physically or spiritually, oppressors in any sense then identified, whoever or whatever they may be, and religion in the fullest sense, cults, mores, sacred knowledge, and the resulting social order. And I specify only play a part, not necessarily bring to fruition. So, and I tend to think that if this entire definition was presented to Dr. Boyarin, he probably would have had some questions at the very least. and maybe not just jumped on board with this.
Yeah, maybe he would have wanted clarity, and maybe things that would have come to mind would have been like Daniel's son of man, that like a son of man, or something in the Dead Sea Scroll material, or even one Enoch. Like there's all sorts of various different things happening in this different literature too. And so I know I would, especially on I'd personally want to go, okay, cosmically, a symbolic. What do you mean a symbolic Messiah? You know, these are the things I'd have questions. I still would have questions about them, but I imagine that would be too much to put on him, or unless you're like just wanting to dwell on the definition. So you just give him a general, hey, let's find something that I'm pretty sure he's going to agree with. So I'm going to give you a definition that I imagine this guy's not going to have any criticism of. If you're trying to just like smooth sail through any criticism and giving favor to your position, and then like if I wanted to do my best to make you look bad, let's just say, and I wanted to make my team look good, I'm probably going to paint. I do it sometimes, I'm sure, when I'm critiquing certain ideas online. I'm going to paint my questions in my interview style in a direction that favors and tries to win them to my side. So it's human nature there, but I do try to do it as honestly. And if I'm wrong, look, I have no problem with just being wrong, like mistaken or anything like that for me, because I don't claim to have all the answers. But I've got some pretty confidence in certain things. But anyway, you know.
Yeah. So just so off the hop, I think I just want to point out that I think the definition that GE gave to Boyarin is not a clear representation of Carrier's definition, especially when you're missing the elements of myth and prophecy, literally, figuratively, cosmically, symbolically, physically, spiritually. All of these elements are pretty important features of how Carrier wants to understand the word throughout his book, right? But do these all conform to a proper understanding of what the Messiah was in early Judaism? And I did hit on this a little bit in my in the first video response that I made to Richard. And this is the reason why, because it's really, really important to be clear about what we're talking about when we're talking about many of these ancient concepts. And it's easy to get them confused because you're dealing with foreign languages, you're dealing with texts written in these foreign ancient languages over longer periods of time, over a time period in which many of the usages of these words shifts and changes and nuances, and not every individual group is going to have the same understanding, and I think Carrier is trying to tease that out in this definition he's provided. I just don't think it's a very good one. But I don't know if you caught it, in Boyarin's response, he did say he didn't like God's true religion. He said he would prefer God's true rule of the world, and I think that's kind of important to understand too, because one of the things Carrier wants to do is he wants to set Christianity as this mystery cult, and then wants to connect the ritual aspects of it more clearly to messianic ideals. And it took watching this video on for Boyarin to respond like that for me to say, yeah, I think that's a mistake, because within early Jewish expectation, this isn't just about rituals and ideas or beliefs or visions and religious experiences and things like that. For the ancient Jews, they were expecting a tangible, true, real deliverance. As near as we can tell, every form of Jewish expectation of the Messiah had to do with real real salvation.
Right.
And I say real salvation as in
Like actual physical earthly, typically the
yes,
nation's coming to
yes,
kick my ass. Hey, I'm going to be a Messiah. I'm going to save these people. So it could, like Cyrus in a way.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, I'm gonna take that away. So I'm gonna put the video back up now. The other thing I noticed in John's cut of this video is that he did take out, at one point he did actually just ask Professor Boyarin what his definition was of the Messiah. So I'm going to just include that. Sorry, I'm terrible at this, you guys, and you're all suffering.
Blame Kip for everything
And
wrong.
yes, everything. And Derek's going, look at this amateur that they've saddled me with.
I remember when
What
I
am
drank
doing here?
beer.
All right. Okay. So here in the part of the interview that that John left out, he actually takes the opportunity to ask Dr. Boyarin about what a Messiah is.
In the context of like Christian origins and things of that nature, I'm wondering, how would you define like a Messiah prior to the development of Christian? Like what did Messiah mean in Judaism prior to that point?
And that's a good question. It's an interesting question, because the Messiah term and concept has a historical development. The word Messiah in Hebrew, Mashiach, right, which is in Greek Christos, means the anointed one. So originally it was a belief in the restoration of the Davidic kingdom as a kind of eschatological moment and resolution of the sufferings of the Israelite people and of the world as a whole. It gradually developed in the centuries before Jesus came on the scene into a belief in a divine human who would come and assume the throne of David and save the world. Right? So that notion, I mean, that's the argument of a chapter in my book, is precisely that concept had been developing and was extant among Jews in the at least a couple of centuries before Jesus was born, right? And so that would make what we call Christianity an ongoing development of a form of Jewish belief. That's why I call my book The Jewish Gospels.
All right, there we go. So, any thoughts on that right away? Or
personally, I mean, look, you study the stuff far more, but I like what he said in terms of a developing, and he could have probably kept going with it in terms of its general use, but I do think it has a Davidic tone through the scriptures. And then also, I like what he said centuries before. You're already getting these kind of divine, one who's like a son of man, evolved into one Enoch, where it is like this son of man is also seated at the right hand of God. And you're getting kind of these developments. But notice something. They don't suffer. There's no suffering context for that. And then the context of Daniel, which is not even talking about the one like the son of man in that context, the suffering one, we're probably, am I jumping ahead here and getting into
you are, and we will get to that.
Sorry, I'm just
but you're absolutely right though.
Yeah.
And the thing I like about it, like he correctly notes the literal meaning of the word, its development as a term applied to royal figures and within a tangible expectation for the restoration of an actual Jewish kingdom, and then later development into this divine human figure, right? Who would assume, and he says this, he would assume the throne of David and save the world. And I think that's critical,
right?
Because like Boyarin clearly understands Jewish messianism within like an historical expectation, right? Not a mythical one.
Right.
You know, I didn't include this in the interview, but at one point he brings up Lubavitcher Ravi. Do you know who that is?
No.
He was the leader recently of a sect of Hasidic Jews who died, and who's regarded by this this Hasidic Jewish sect as the Messiah who's coming back. And now something that I think needs to be, and I'll keep coming back to this. So this interview is largely about Daniel Boyarin's work in his popular book, The Jewish Gospels. And his point in that book is to show the thoroughly Jewish nature of the Christian conception of Jesus as the Messiah. But again, Boyarin's entire approach is controlled by this idea that the Messiah was always understood as an actual human figure. In fact, a huge part of his whole approach is to say, look at the Gospels as historical sources, right?
Okay.
Like he's reading them in many ways. He's reading them like a Christian scholar might read these texts as clear reflections of the historical life of Jesus and death of Jesus.
Right.
So, yeah, I think it's an important point.
Once we get covering some of the interesting stuff with Daniel, and then also we can go even further into this, because the idea that Christ or Jesus is portrayed as a king is where you get this Messiah notion. And probably, if you grant there was a guy, and you go that path, probably either whether or not during his life or after it, he was at least viewed this way in some way, shape, or form as a Messiah. And then they're having to, in a way, ad hoc reason and rationalize, trying to make sense of the figure as they're painting a narrative about him. We were talking about that the other night. There's a lot of interesting possibilities of how to possibly piece that together. But
oh, for sure. Yeah. So no, but we probably we need to move on. So I'm going to go to the next section here, where GE then asks Boyarin about about that other clip of me talking about the word Mashiach as it's applied to prophets in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
I'm not so sure about religions in antiquity, whether that was a term that they used or not. Now, the God of Israel is also just simply God.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's got
I've had.
No, he's called the Father. He's called Allah. But it's the same God.
I was also able to ask Dr. Boyarin about this idea that the Messiah or Messiahs were generally just thought as synonymous with prophets. Dr. Boyarin had a very powerful and adverse reaction.
So, just what do you think of that as a representation of what I was saying in that clip that we watched? Was I saying that was
he said?
Yeah,
or are you talking about
what
John's saying now?
What John's saying?
So back in 10 seconds for me. Just
yeah. Okay, let's see. 6:10.
Yep.
Is that far enough?
Just thought as synonymous with prophets. Dr. Boyarin had a very powerful and adverse reaction.
Was I saying that messiahs were just synonymous with prophets in the clip that
that's one of the things that can be the case, but not like as if is almost like they are synonymous, meaning that is what it means or something to that effect.
What it means, right? Yeah.
No, it's not limited to that. Is your point? Yeah.
Exactly.
Reaction to this entire idea that Kip just espoused. I've had some pushback against whenever I'm having these discussions that that Jews at this particular point in time prior to Christianity really use the term Messiah to only refer to prophets, and that there were a lot of messiahs going around because if you were a prophet, then you were considered a messiah.
Oh, I went way too
Shamelessly.
far. Crap.
Or
Sorry.
to what they right?
Sorry. There we go. I got it back.
Yeah, it just re-emphasizing the point that that's not the exclusive definition that you were trying to push.
No, like here's the clip that that GE used from the video.
I'm sorry to say that that is
no, that's not it. Here it is. Sorry, I have to go back. Sorry guys, I hit the wrong button and it just messed everything up. I'm a professional YouTuber, as we can all see. Here we go. Here's the clip that that he used in his video of me.
This term, Mashiach, which means anointed one, which comes to mean Messiah, within the Dead Sea Scrolls, far and away, most of the time, this is with reference to prophets.
Where
in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and by the way, you didn't even exclusively say that. You said by far and like mostly is in reference to prophets, but not even exclusively or only. You made that point. So if he would have asked the question and said, well, this one scholar who's a Dead Sea Scroll scholar says that mostly when the Mashiach is used in the Dead Sea Scroll, it may be referring to prophets. What do you think about that? That would have been that would not have left Dr. Boyarin, is it Boyarin?
Boyarin
in the dark a little bit on like what is being said. But look, this is what happens when you're weaponizing things to try and like critique, you know?
Yeah. Exactly. Here, so
this is just a way you talk about prophets. So it's interesting when you read the scrolls because you start seeing Mashiachim, the plural form. You start seeing messiahs popping up all over the place. It's a fairly well used term, and based on Jason's research, by and large, this is meant to indicate prophets of Yahweh as anointed figures. The word itself just means anointed one, right?
So
by and large,
yes. Also, I was as we noted, I was very clearly just speaking with reference to how this specific word Mashiach is being used by the writers of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing too, when I said, I think he's trying to, like, when I said you read the Dead Sea Scrolls and you see a bunch of prophets just running around, like this was me just being kind of colloquial in saying that the word is used so frequently in the text, right, in the Qumran literature, that you get this sense that there were messiahs everywhere. But of course, that's only taking into consideration this pretty focused definition without realizing that at the time that the scrolls were written, the word didn't just mean one thing, right?
Right.
So, but now we're gonna go back and look at Professor Boyarin's response to John's question to my description.
I'm sorry to say that is errant, rank nonsense.
Oh, okay. I mean, I haven't heard of that, and so it sounded a little it sounded a little out there to me.
So there's he doesn't even know your context. So like this is I mean, if the question he asked was what you said, that is errant rank nonsense, period. Okay. If that's what your definition of a Messiah was, that's just all I would say is that if I interviewed someone and asked them a question that wasn't actually what you're insisting and then acted like that's what you're insisting, I think I saw the thumbnail and it has that those are the words that he said, and he's answering the very heart of the issue, it seems, to why you even had me join you on here. And that is, what is a Messiah? And like, he's using this scholar to kind of attack you as if you're just making stuff up about the Messiah. And he's like, errant rank nonsense. Look, I would have had more appreciation if it wasn't clearly like a false question. Okay, like if it wasn't like a deceiving question, a strawmanning your position and then pitching it to another academic as if that's what you're actually saying and exclusively. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate that you can see that. So I'm a little disappointed that, because like there's other parts in that interview where I think I actually provide some clarity to what I'm talking about. So like in the very next part of that interview with Dave McDonald, that John clip, I went on to say this.
So when it comes to reading a lot of this literature, and understanding what's going on in it, like when we talk about Isaiah 52 and 53 as messianic texts, sure, in that people read these texts and saw elements within them which spoke to their present day or to what they understood to take place in the last days. That's what messianic means. It doesn't mean that they always, or even mostly, or ever understood the suffering servant to be the king that Yahweh was going to promote to usher in the new age.
So,
but again, I'm asking you.
Maybe it's not altogether clear, but the point I'm making here is that the usage of this particular word, Mashiach, is so fluid that it can be difficult to establish concrete parameters around how a specific group envisioned the Messiah, right? And distinguished him from other messiahs. This was my original problem with Carrier's definition of the term. So while it can be broadly applied, it must be very carefully nuanced and understood. There are critical diachronic considerations, generic elements, cultural context, etc., to bear in mind when translating and understanding the word Mashiach and how it may or may not relate to Jewish Christian concepts of the Messiah. My point is that there are lots of times throughout Jewish literature where you see the word Mashiach and it doesn't have anything to do with the Messiah.
Right. Context. And I don't know why this came to my mind as you were saying this, but I was thinking about the context within the New Testament itself, even in the Christian context, where it is almost implied by the author that the Jews of the time, his own disciples, are misinterpreting, right? I say miss as in the author's trying to say, no, listen, guys, he was supposed to suffer. And they're like, no, he's going to come in. I know what's going to happen. He's going to have an iron rod. He's going to do what the kings do. He's going to destroy our enemies. We're going to be back to good. That's the expectation of the authors, kind of giving you a window into what they were thinking should have been the expectation of Jesus. And he doesn't fit those expectations of what they were thinking. A king coming in, kicking ass.
Right.
Yeah. So like even the New Testament Gospels give you a taste of that kingly Messiah type of context. And they have to, depending on how you want to do this, and I understand there's so many different angles on how you want to navigate this. Someone like Boyarin will say, look, it's after his death that they have to reason and reconcile how he actually was the Messiah. And then they find suffering context and recontextualize it onto Jesus and things. There's a lot of stuff that you can do that you could try to reason through. Or it was always intended that he was a suffering figure. But the point is that the authors themselves are letting you know, everyone's thinking he's coming to kick ass like the expectation of a Davidic king. And what does he do? None of that. So...
Exactly.
I jumped ahead a little probably, but I'm just
maybe a little, but that's fine. So like the problem I have with Carrier's definition is that he just flattens all of this. And I think it's mostly because he doesn't read the actual languages themselves, right? Like when you actually read the text in their original languages, you can start to see how these words, which can mean a variety of different things, are functioning in context, right?
Help me out, Stillman. Okay, because this is like Inception happening here. So I am here joining you, and you are responding to a response by John about you, but this is all in relation to ultimately Dr. Carrier's position. So when you said he's flattening the definition, what do you think he is trying to do? Give me a little more clarity of what you think his definition is, the best you can.
So I think what he's doing, to put this simply, I think he is saying every single instance where you see that word, Mashiach, you can apply any feature of this large definition that I provided to. I think that's, and then he is picking and choosing the elements of this definition that he's applying to every single one of the usages of this particular word. I think that's what's happening.
Now,
right?
I want to obviously not do anything possibly strawmanning or misrepresenting.
Yep.
I could imagine interviewing Carrier and Carrier saying, well, I'm saying they're optional, meaning like depending on the context, then this definitional kind of prerequisite that's possible, one of these could fit it depending on if the context merits it. So I guess the point would be then, if you think Carrier's perception of that context that he's trying to pull that definition from, you might even disagree with some of the elements of the definition in general to begin with, correct?
I certainly agree with elements of the definition to begin with.
Okay. Got it.
The stuff about the religion, the stuff about mythology, whether the figurative versus literal, this kind of stuff, I think that's just too far afield. That's outside of everything I know about the early Jewish conception of who the Messiah was, what the Messiah was going to do, right? So, and then as we'll see, there are certainly places where Carrier's interpretation of a text based on the way he understands this definition is not factoring in the actual context of the actual literature. So I wanted to, my friend Simone is in the chat. I don't know if you're familiar with Simone, Derek, but
I think I have come across Simone. They've been in my chat, I think, several times too.
So she is a graduate student working on rabbinic literature. And basically what that means is that she knows more about rabbinic literature than I do, certainly. Definitely more than either Carrier or John Gleason. But she sent me a number of notes that she took in watching the interview that John did with Boyarin, and this is one of the things that she pointed out. The definition of not what GE asks Boyarin about, but rather the English word Messiah, the semantic range of which is far more narrow, being a subset of the former. Even post-Christian Jewish writings use Mashiach, that's the Hebrew word, to refer not just to priests, but even to sacrificial animals. See throughout Mishnah Horayot and the Gemara. This includes Par HaMashiach in Mishnah Horayot 3:6, which just means anointed bull. Kohen Mashiach, which is the anointed priest, is used hundreds of times in the rabbinic literature, etc., etc. Boyarin clearly doesn't think that the hundreds of mentions of Kohen Mashiach meet the definition he provided for Messiah. In fact, he excludes, and we'll get to this, he excludes Onias III from the category of Messiah when he is both by definition and in text. This is Daniel 7:25-26, and we'll get to it. He is called a Mashiach And yet Boyarin would also agree with me that he's not regarded as the Messiah.
Right.
And he's not wrong to do this, as they don't fit the definition of the English word Messiah, because the two definitions overlap, but they aren't equivalent. And that's really important. So, yeah.
I mean, when are we getting to Onias? When are we getting to this?
Oh, it's coming here.
Okay.
Let's see what's next. I have to do that. And then I have to do this again. Sorry, guys. Share.
It's his fault.
And I have to. It is my fault always. There. That's on screen. Okay. What's next here?
But again, I'm asking you because you are the expert here.
Yeah. Well, so I'm agreeing with you that it's prophets are prophets, and the Messiah is the Messiah, and they're very, very distinct. Very distinct notions. They're not in contrast with each other or contradiction, but they're quite different.
Yeah.
Mm.
Not every federal judge is the president of the United States.
So this is sort of the point that Simone is getting at, that Boyarin is talking about the Messiah, right? And what I was talking about in the video clip that I presented, and what John presented to him, what I was talking about was the usage of the word Mashiach. But Boyarin's basically he's answering a different question, I think. And I would also say that I suspect that Boyarin is just reacting to how GE framed the assertion. But this idea that prophets are prophets and the Messiah is the Messiah and they're very, very distinct, it's just not a clear representation of the earliest Jewish literature, which we know from the Dead Sea Scrolls. And Boyarin's a rabbinic specialist, right? So it's unsurprising to me if he hasn't read all the relevant literature on this.
Right.
So it's very possible that he doesn't really know what I'm getting at, what I'm talking about here. So and I think it's important. I'm going to bring up some presentation slides here again.
While you do that, I think it would be awesome to reduce the inception and actually have you and him do a discussion on this topic. And you reach out to the academic himself and say, hey, I'd love to talk to you about rabbinic literature, and just get into the word Mashiach and take a deep dive with him about how rabbinic literature seems to use this. Bring up the example that we have from our friend here in the chat about this definition, because I have a question about this too. I'm kind of curious to know, since animals, anointed bulls could be Mashiach, so to speak, they're savior-like. Is that because people were hungry, they needed food, or are they believing in some mystical sense where it is either a sin-related thing, or it's in some way the elemental aspect that this gives them, I don't know, good luck, a blessing or something to this effect? So it's saving them, gives them longer life. What do they believe happens in this sacrificial act of the bull? But I don't know. I'm just curious.
No, that's an interesting question. And maybe if Simone is still in the chat here, it's something that she can chime in on.
Look, they've been anointed with oil prior to sacrifice. So it's that simple.
Right.
Interesting.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. You see what I'm saying?
It's just like, this is the thing we have to be careful about, right? Like sometimes the word just means to anoint something.
Yeah. That's why context should determine your definition. And if you start with a potential, like, I don't know, you have a certain idea, then you have to fit the definitions to match it. I have heard someone criticize one time about Dr. Carrier's view of crucifixion. When he goes to the definition of crucifixion,
I have problems with that too. Yeah.
Yeah. He says that Inanna was crucified, and it says she was hung on a hook in the ancient myth of Inanna. But if you pay close attention, is that considered a crucifixion, or is that just she's dead and now they hang her on a hook? How, like the very context of crucifixion and its use in Roman, torture device, so to speak, for criminals doesn't, I mean, there's an act of death and a violent death, but do you call that crucifixion because it's an act of violent death? Or what, you know what I'm saying? Like, you got to be careful about how you may word these things, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right about that. So, I wanted to talk about this term Mashiach as it's used in the Dead Sea Scrolls in one particular really interesting way, I think. Okay, and that's as with reference to prophets. And I'm getting this from a book by Alex B. Jason that he wrote back in 2007 called Mediating the Divine. Did I say it right the first time? I don't know. Anyways,
I don't know. You're
called
cutting out here
Mediating
and
the
there, though,
Divine.
so.
Oh no. And so he devotes an entire chapter to the usage of this word, Mashiach, to refer to prophets. It occurs in this sense in at least 9 texts from the Dead Sea Scrolls. You can see those listed on the screen. And here's just a couple of examples. So this is the Damascus document, column 2, line 12. He made known by the hand of those anointed, that's the Mashiach, with his Holy Spirit, seers of truth. These are prophets.
Right.
Seers,
yeah.
So here's another one. By the hand of your anointed ones, seers of the testimonies, you have proclaimed to us the times of wars by your hands, that you may be glorified before our enemies, to bring to ruin the troops of Belial. So that's from the War Scroll, column 11, line 7 to 8. And there again, it's very similar. By the hand of your anointed ones, seers of the testimonies, you have proclaimed. This is about prophecy. I got one more here. You're probably not going to be able to see all of it because our faces are in the way. Cursed is the man who does not affirm, keep, and perform all the commandments of Yahweh by the mouth of Moses, his anointed one, his Mashiach. And that's from 4Q 377 to 5. So this is the point, right? Prophets in the Dead Sea Scrolls were often identified with this term, Mashiach. And this doesn't mean that they were the Messiah, right? Here's where the careful difference is. Now, here's what Jason says about this usage in the scrolls. He says, the Dead Sea Scrolls attest to the widening, of the use of this term anointed ones for prophets, whereby the designation has entered into the post-biblical lexicon of prophetic terminology. The use of anointed ones as a designation for prophets is clearly grounded in 3 biblical passages. That's Psalm 105:15, 1 Kings 19, verse 16, and Isaiah 61:1. He says the Isaiah passage is particularly important for the transformation of anointed ones at Qumran. Pesher exegesis on this verse in 11Q Melchizedek, 11Q 13, provides explicit testimony concerning how this verse was understood by the Qumran community in the prophetic role of the anointed one contained therein. So this is the passage from Isaiah 61 verse 1, and you can see how this idea was derived from the Hebrew Bible, right? The Spirit of my Lord Yahweh is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news, to the humble. He has sent me to bind the brokenhearted, to cry out freedom to the captives, to those who are bound, liberation, to announce the year of favor for Yahweh and a day of revenge for our God. This is a prophetic proclamation. And the prophet, the messenger here, is described as a Mashiach, an anointed one. So Jason continues. Actually, first of all, no, this is, and you know what? before I continue with this, I feel like I need to move us, Derek. There we go.
Okay.
So that we can see
There
this
you go.
a little bit more. There we go. This will be better. Oh no, add to stage. Thank you. Yeah, this is better. Okay. It's slow. There we go. So this is the critical text in the Melchizedek scroll 11Q13. This is the day of peace about which he said through Isaiah the prophet, who said, how beautiful on the mountains are the feet of the messenger who announces peace, the messenger of good who announces salvation, saying to Zion, your God is king. That's Isaiah 52, verse 7. Its interpretation is this: the mountains are the prophets. And then it's broken up so we don't quite see what's there. And it continues, and the messenger is the anointed Mashiach with the Spirit, as Daniel said about him, until an anointed Mashiach, a prince, it is 7 weeks. That's Daniel 9:25. And the messenger of good, who announces salvation, is the one about whom it is written. There's a break there. Something about comforting the afflicted. This is from Isaiah 61, verse 2. Its interpretation to instruct them in all the ages of the world. It's confusing and it's a bit problematic, right? Because it's a fragmentary text. But within this text, the anointed one is being presented as a messenger, as a prophet. And this is Jason's point, right? He is suggesting particularly that this term, Mashiach HaRuach, the Messiah, the anointed of the Spirit, is a term being utilized for prophets. He continues. The present Pesher forms part of a larger eschatological midrash with Melchizedek as the central figure. More specifically, the text here contains a Pesher interpretation of Isaiah 52, verse 7. The mountains in this verse are understood by the Pesher as a reference to prophets. The text continues by providing an interpretation of the herald in Isaiah 52:7, here identified as the Mashiach HaRuach, the Messiah, the anointed with the Spirit. Commentators immediately recognize the affinity with Isaiah 61:1. While the object of the Pesher is Isaiah 52:7, the Pesher itself brings the interpretation back to Isaiah 61:1. The herald of Isaiah 52:7 is conflated with the role of the prophetic disciple in Isaiah 61:1 as the messenger of God's good tiding. Thus, the Mashiach HaRuach should be identified as a prophetic figure and not as Melchizedek himself or as a royal messianic figure. He concludes this way. The passage from Isaiah 61:1 has been significantly modified in 11Q Melchizedek. The biblical passage seems to intimate that the Spirit descended upon the prophet as a result of anointing. Indeed, this is further suggested by the clear division of these two elements into two distichs. The Qumran text has joined the two elements of these distichs and reinterpreted the biblical conception of the relationship between the prophet, the anointing, and the Spirit. No longer does the Spirit descend upon the prophet after having been appointed by God. Rather, the Spirit itself is the anointing agent. So yeah, that's from pages 90 to 93. So the whole point here that I'm really trying to emphasize is that within the Dead Sea Scrolls, when you see this word Mashiach, very often what you're dealing with is just a description of a prophetic anointing, and it has nothing to do with the Messiah, the Davidic king who's going to come back and restore the world.
Just based on what I've heard so far from this, it's interesting. It goes back to Boyarin's point about this evolution, and you can see they're already starting to do things, and the context in which they're pulling from, it seems like later authors are also starting to merge stuff, like slowly add in things and like equivocate stuff that originally wasn't there. So it seems the Dead Sea Scroll authors are doing that, but they're still careful enough not to go too far. And we see that happening in the later literature where they just start merging things, merging concepts, merging issues. At least in Christian literature, it seems that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see what I'm trying to get at?
That's true. But like lots of this is happening as a result of things that change the perspective of the people who's writing this stuff too, right? So now this is an important text. This 11Q Melchizedek is an important text in Carrier's book. And I just wanted to put up here. So this is how he describes the 11Q Melchizedek. He says this is an apocalyptic pressure, a document attempting to discover hidden messages in the scriptures by finding secret links among disparate and previously unrelated verses, which is generally true, which altogether communicate God's plan mostly, and certainly in this case, his plans for the coming Messiah. Maybe, but there's conjecture here as to a lot of what's going on. And in particular, if this text is about the coming Messiah, the Davidic king, who's going to conquer Israel's enemies and establish God's kingdom, the word Mashiach is not the word that's being used to describe him. There's other things within this text that could indicate that. So his plans for the coming Messiah, the defeat of evil and the end of the world. There are many such Pesharim at Qumran. This one tells about the messenger of Isaiah 52 to 53. Now you'll notice that Isaiah 53 is not actually ever mentioned in 11Q Melchizedek. So it's just this one verse from Isaiah 52, verse 7, and it's because of this description of the messenger who's bringing good news. So I think that's a problem right away. But he says this is linked with, in Isaiah, with the servant who will die and atone for everyone's sins, presaging God's final victory. Again, all of this stuff is just not in the text, which, as we have already seen later, Jews definitely regarded as the Messiah. At Qumran, 11Q13 appears to say that this messenger is the same man as the Messiah of Daniel 9, I would say the anointed one of Daniel 9, who dies around the same time, and that's not clear. That depends very much on how you reconstruct what's missing in the text, and I won't get into that, but it's really problematic. Sorry, where was I?
Who dies around
the same time. Yeah, at the end, an end to sin is said to be accomplished, again presaging God's victory, and that the day on which this happens will be a great and final day of atonement, absolving the sins of the elect, after which 11:13 goes on to say God and his Savior will overthrow all demonic forces, and this will proceed according to the timetable in Daniel chapter 9. Thus, 11Q13 appears to predict that a Messiah will die, and that this will mark the final days, before which sorry, I just got distracted. My kid is here. Hi. Sorry, where was I? The Messiah will mark the final days before which God's agent or agents will defeat Belial or Satan and atone for the sins of the elect. So that's from his page, well, page 72 in my electronic edition of his book. So without a clear understanding of how the word Mashiach is functioning in this text, you can't just assume your conclusion based on this very, very broad definition that you've concocted. So the entire point of focusing on the usage of this word in the scrolls is to better understand what it means in a text like this, which is clearly not how Carrier wants to read it. Critically, the Messiah in this text is not the same figure as the suffering servant who is never mentioned in the text. He is not clearly the same figure as the celestial deliverer who will return and defeat Belial. He does not appear to be the same figure who will atone for the sons of light and the men of the lot of Melchizedek. So it's it's important to bring all that out,
right,
to show how this word functions by and large, as I said, in a number of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and in particular this important text. And you have to understand how it functions in this text before you can start making claims about what this text says regarding the Messiah. Is that clear?
Yep, you made yourself
Okay.
clear. And for those who
Cool.
don't know, ultimately what Kip was saying is you can't start with this preconceived, almost Christian, or at least guaranteed to be a Christian interpretation of it, and then work backwards to this particular passage. If the passage doesn't explicitly reference it or make it clear that it's describing that as the issue, then don't draw that as a conclusion. Or at least if you want to say this is what I think it's saying, you know, be cautious. I mean, I wouldn't. You're doing your own pesher at that point, you know.
Okay. I'm actually going to skip ahead here a little bit for the sake of time, and we will continue with the video. I hope everyone's having a good day. There's a bunch of you who've decided to come and hang out with us on Labor Day. Really appreciate it. All right.
Absolutely.
So let's see. I think let me see if this is right. Oh shit. What did I just do? Again, I've got many things going on at the same time.
It's your fault.
It is my fault. Thank you. So
you looking for the recording now?
I'm looking. I'm actually looking on my notes to see where exactly I am. Okay. So remember that where we left off, Boyarin had said that that to call the Messiah just synonymous with prophet was errant rank nonsense. Okay.
Right.
So we'll continue there. Oh, there we go. Oh shit. I didn't add it, did I? Sorry. I actually have to add it to the there we go. There was just I'm a professional YouTuber. There we go. Okay.
Oh, well, that's quite the condemnation of what Dr. Kip Davis was claiming about the pre-Christian Messiah concept. One thing I did notice in my discussion with Dr. Daniel Boyarin was that he primarily supported a lot of modal arguments for this concept of a suffering, disgraced, and dying Messiah, which means that different interpretations of these texts are plausible and shouldn't be dismissed out of hand without any evidence to dismiss them with. More importantly,
so I just want to say at this point that I would certainly agree that we should not dismiss specific interpretations out of hand without evidence. But I think it's also important to point out that evidence is required for forwarding novel interpretations of ancient texts. And I would posit that any evidence there is for a pre-Christian view of a suffering, disgraced, and dying Messiah is at best vague and at worst completely non-existent. And we will get into that.
importantly, not all Jews held one uniform idea about any of these concepts, which is why these interpretations shouldn't be dismissed out of hand without evidence. Next, one of the key arguments that Kip Davis really harped on was this idea that Dr. Carrier was not fit to interpret the Talmudic texts. And of course, whether or not the Jews of the Talmud associated scripture like Isaiah 52 and 53 with a Messiah, interpreting these texts as being messianic. Dr. Kip Davis strongly believes that the rabbis did not fully consider Isaiah 52 and 53 to be all about the Messiah, that instead there's this atomization of the text to where the rabbis only considered portions of the text to be about the Messiah instead of the entirety of it. I'll let him tell you himself. My claim is that the rabbis in B Sanhedrin 98b have no interest in the, quote, suffering servant, end quote. Beyond this one verse. Moreover, they do not cite Isaiah 53 at all in B Sanhedrin 93b. Carrier's reading of these Talmudium is demonstrably incorrect. No citation of other sources helps to correct that error. Besides, I have come to discover that half of the time Carrier's cited secondary sources do not align at all with the point he is attempting to make. He regularly, shamelessly pads his bibliography.
Okay, so we're talking now about the way that the rabbis understood Isaiah 53. And the point that I was making in this clip, or in, I guess, the tweets that that John showed on the screen, these extend from the video that I originally did about Carrier's treatment of the Babylonian Talmud. And part of my point is that when you're reading the Talmud or the Mishnah, and you see cited texts of scripture, unless you have warrant to do so, you shouldn't extend their usage of a verse of a text of scripture to cover like an entire chapter.
Well,
does that make sense?
Yeah. But that's even New Testament. That's not even just in Talmud. I imagine it gets even more specific there, but they're doing pesher. A lot of academics have pointed this out with Paul, with the way Paul will take a passage and use it, often not even meaning what it originally meant, out of the middle of a sentence. He'll say something, the dog kicked the ball down the road and he ran down there and showed some love to his friends and took the ball back down to the street. Well, like he might just want to, show love to his friends. So he pulls in the middle of a sentence, shows love to his friends. That doesn't mean he has a ball or that he's returning the ball back. Has nothing to do with that, even in the sentence. But
exactly,
I would be very cautious. I mean, you could ask the question, does this rabbi, this Sanhedrin, this Jew, do they have that in mind? Maybe. But you shouldn't necessarily draw the conclusion that that's exactly what they mean if they don't explicitly use it as a reference or try to actually give you context. That's my personal take on that.
Yeah, exactly. I thought it was useful. This is a bit of a longer clip, but this is from my original video where I actually explain what's going on with this rather important tractate that we're going to talk a little bit, and that Boyarin's going to talk a little bit. This is the Babylonian Talmud, Sanhedrin 98b. Maybe I'll speed this up a little bit.
Our exploration of Carrier's understanding and presentation of early Judaism by first taking a look at his Element 5, which appears in Chapter 4, his chapter on background knowledge. Element 5, basically summarized, says that some early Jews expected a death of their anticipated Messiah, and this death marked the imminent end of the world. So where does Carrier get this idea? He says that it comes from the Talmud. The Talmud provides us with a proof of concept at the very least, an actual confirmation at the very most. It explicitly says the suffering servant who dies in Isaiah 53 is the Messiah, and that the Messiah will endure great suffering before his death. Carrier has included a footnote at this point in his text, which draws our attention to two tractates from the Babylonian Talmud. That's Babylonian Talmud, Sanhedrin 98b and 93b. And these, I assume, provide the so-called explicit proof that the suffering servant who dies in Isaiah 53 is the Messiah. One of the things that Carrier does with frequency throughout this chapter is provides either just references, summaries, or paraphrases of the actual Jewish sources that he is reading. Very rarely, if at all, does he actually cite the sources themselves. This is important, and in order to get into this, let's take a look and see what these tractates actually do say. This is the Babylonian Talmud, Sanhedrin 98b 14. What is his name? The school of Rabbi She'ilah says Shiloh is his name, as it is stated, until when Shiloh shall come. That's Genesis 49, verse 10. The school of Rabbi Yanai says Yanon is his name, as it is stated. May his name endure forever. May his name continue, Yanon, as long as the sun. That's Psalm 72, 17. The school of Rabbi Hanina says Hanina is his name, as it is stated, for I will show you no favor, or Hanina. That's Jeremiah 16, verse 13. And some say that Menachem ben Hizkiah is his name, as it is stated, because the comforter, Menachem, that should relieve my soul is far from me. That's a quotation of Lamentations 1:16. And the rabbis say, the leper of the house of Rabbi is his name, as it is stated. Indeed, our illnesses he did bear, and our pains he endured. Yet we did esteem him injured, stricken by God, and afflicted. And that final quotation is Isaiah chapter 53, verse 4. The Babylonian Talmud is massive. It's many, many volumes. It contains individual traditions or sayings that on their own are very difficult to date. But we can derive some sense of their terminus ad quo on the basis of the mention of certain rabbis with whom they're associated. In this instance, the tradition that we're concerned with, the one which cites Isaiah 53, verse 4, cannot date any earlier than the students of the rabbi.
That's a very generous dating
this
on my
Rabbi
part.
Yehuda Hanasi, or Rabbi Judah the Prince. And he lived between about 160 and 220. You will notice that there are several scriptures cited in this rabbinic tractate. Genesis chapter 49, verse 10, Psalm 72:17, Jeremiah 16:13, etc. I hope you will have also noticed that where these texts are cited, this is not with reference to larger sections, rather only to individual key words and phrases that appear within these fragments of the text. Carrier claims that the suffering servant who dies in Isaiah 53 is the Messiah, and that this Messiah will endure great suffering before his death. No. I mean, you'll notice that only this one verse from Isaiah chapter 53, verse 4 is quoted. That means that the rabbis were only interested in what this one verse had to communicate about the Messiah. And you'll also notice that this one verse about the Messiah has nothing at all to do with the suffering servant presented in Isaiah 53. So what is going on in this tractate? This tractate concerns the name of the Messiah, nothing more. It says so right at the start. What is his name? Various responses are given on the basis of key words appearing in very specific passages. So one name proposed for the Messiah is by the Ravnan. This is an unspecified larger group of rabbis. And the name they propose is Kivra Devi Ravi, literally the leper of the house of Ravi. And this is on the basis of Isaiah 53, verse 4, which in Hebrew says, Ochein Halenu Hu Nasa. Why do the rabbis say this? Because our illnesses he carried. That's the translation of the passage. This is an allusion to Ravi Yehuda Hanasi, who had a famous student known as the leper, Hivora. In other words, this passage predicts the leper who is sick and is from the house of Nasi will be the name of the Messiah. The rabbis are playing on the verb meaning to carry, Nasa. Remember, he carries our illnesses with the name of the great rabbi, Yehuda Hanasi. This has nothing to do with the suffering servant who dies. Death is not even mentioned in this passage. The rabbis are only concerned about the connection between this phrase in Isaiah 53, verse 4, and Judah Hanasi's student. And their only interest in this passage is identifying the name of the Messiah.
So, did you follow all that?
Yeah.
All right. So there's lots of wordplay on taking place in the Babylonian Talmud, right? And that with lots of these texts that they're citing, they're basically just completely ignoring notions of the broader context.
The other thing that came to mind was that, yes, the context, they are describing what the Messiah's name should be or will be, using the name there. But like, nowhere is they saying what the Messiah, like the Messiah himself has to suffer and then pays for our sins, this kind of stuff. They're playing word games with scripture to pinpoint the Messiah in their own time, or at least, in the not too distant future, based on names of other people that are in their community, probably, and like all sorts of interesting things. But like, it's really interesting to see how they're doing that. I guess if you're into that kind of stuff and reading that, I don't know how long I could read that before I'd be bored and be like,
it's a whole different kind of literature. So I would add to this. Now, the dating here is pretty important, and I was really, really generous in terms of suggesting a date as early as the late second, early third century, based on just when Judah Hanasi lived, right?
Right.
But I would actually say, like, and scholars, including Daniel Boyarin, will tell you that this particular tractate dates to at best or the content behind it at best 4th century, maybe.
So you were
So
giving an extremely generous date, but not only
yes,
that, would he
yes.
agree with your interpretation of it?
Not I think he and I would probably differ in terms of how we understand this the suffering Messiah in the view of the rabbis at this time. So I'm not entirely clear on that, but he wrote about this text in his book in the Jewish Gospels. I would add that I certainly agree that some rabbis, maybe from the 4th century, think of the servant song in Isaiah 53 as messianic. But in line with how much care we need to take with our definitions, it is crucial to be really clearly nuanced about what this means, right?
Right.
Messianic in what sense? At best, I think the song describes characteristics of the Messiah, but again, this is a Messiah who is sick and mistreated, not a Messiah who dies. Carrier has claimed that this tractate, Babylonian Talmud Sanhedrin 98b, quote, explicitly says the suffering servant who dies in Isaiah 53 is the Messiah, and that the Messiah will endure great suffering before his death. It's not even implicit.
Now, is he getting this from any other academics that are taking that interpretation?
He has cited this tractate, and he has cited Boyarin. He
have you
also
read, does Boyarin take that position?
Oh yeah, and well no. Boyarin takes the position that I stated, that this is describing characteristics of the Messiah, and that this is describing a Messiah who is sick and mistreated, and that's it. But John actually in the next clip talks to Dr. Boyarin about this particular text and about the suffering servant.
I mean, Dr. Carrier and myself can read Dr. Daniel Boyarin's words on this in his book, The Jewish Gospels, the story of the Jewish Christ. And it really doesn't leave much room for interpretation here.
The suffering Messiah who atones for our sins was a familiar idea throughout the history of the Jewish religion, even long after there truly was a separation from Christianity. The idea of a suffering Messiah is present in ancient, medieval, and early modern Judaism. This fact, at the very least, calls into question the truism that the formation and acceptance of this idea by followers of Jesus constituted the necessary and absolute breaking point with the religion of Israel. The suffering Messiah is part and parcel of Jewish tradition from antiquity to modernity. Not only then is the gospel drawing on Jewish tradition, but this idea remained a Jewish one long after Christianity had indeed been separated off in late antiquity.
Can I just throw something out there, because I've not read Boyarin?
Yeah.
Like, I would be curious to ask Boyarin if I ever interviewed him. Now, when you're saying this, you're not necessarily saying the interpretation as it's portrayed in the Gospels is the interpretation that was just generally kind of accepted as the perception of a suffering Messiah figure in that same sense, right? You're definitely just saying they're riffing off the same traditions, but you don't mean that, do you? And I doubt he's going to say, "Oh, yeah, I doubt he's going to agree with that."
No, you're absolutely right. And no, he absolutely would not. What Boyarin is saying in his book, and we'll continue the quote here in a minute, but what he's saying in his book is that this idea of a suffering Messiah in Isaiah 53 is derived through a well-traveled rabbinic exegetical technique. So what he's suggesting is that the Gospels and their interpretation of Isaiah 53 is right at home with the way that Jews read and interpreted their scriptures. That's what he's saying.
Right. So
and then he says, and then he's going, and for proof of that, look at this, this tractate in the Babylonian Talmud, this much later tractate in the Babylonian Talmud, where they're basically using the same techniques to arrive at something that looks quite similar.
So like that's interesting, because going to the original context, I was reading recently some of the academics, and no one knows who this actual character is in the original context of Isaiah 53 that it's describing. There are interesting academics who make good arguments to suggest it might mean Israel as a people, as a national identity, as a group. There are some who make interesting arguments to suggest it may be Isaiah themselves, the second Isaiah author who's writing this. They may be speaking about themselves as the character who's going through suffering. It may be this guy or that prophet or this prophet. And notice the prophets, interesting. That's a lot of the interpretation. Not trying to nail that one down. But anyway, like these academics in the original context are giving you this. And so I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I just think it's interesting to think about that.
It totally is. Now, I'll say something else. Let's finish the quotation.
Sorry,
modernity. Not only then is the gospel drawing on Jewish tradition, but this idea remained a Jewish one long after Christianity had indeed been separated off in late antiquity. There are also various medieval Jewish commentators, among them figures marginal to rabbinic Judaism, but hardly suspected of Christian leanings, such as the Karaite Yefet ben Ali, who clearly understand the Isaiah text and its suffering servant as about the Messiah. The early modern Kabbalist Rabbi Moshe Alshek, also a spotlessly Orthodox rabbinite teacher, writes, quote, I may remark then that our rabbis with one voice accept and affirm the opinion that the prophet is speaking of the King Messiah, and we ourselves also adhere to the same view, end quote. The intellectual giant of Spanish Jewry, Rabbi Moses ben Naaman, concedes that according to the Midrash and the rabbis of the Talmud, Isaiah 53 is entirely about the Messiah, but he dissents. Daniel Boyarin, The Jewish Gospels, The Story of the Jewish Christ, pages 82 and 83. It has been generally assumed by modern folks that Jews have always given the passage a metaphorical reading, understanding the suffering servant to refer to the people of Israel, and that it was the Christians who changed and distorted its meaning to make it refer to Jesus. Quite to the contrary. We now know that many Jewish authorities, maybe even most, until nearly the modern period, have read Isaiah 53 as being about the Messiah. Until the last few centuries, the allegorical reading was a minority position. Daniel Boyarin, The Jewish Gospels, The Story of the Jewish Christ, pages 82 and 83.
There we go. So, you know who I'll tell you this. I think these comments of Boyarin's, you know who these are. If I could think of one person, you know who these are directed towards?
Christians?
No, I would actually say this is the kind of comment that would be directed towards someone like Ravi Tovia Singer.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right?
I get what you mean. I'm saying that this is definitely marketing to a Christian audience, in my opinion.
For sure. Yes.
Yeah.
But the criticism here is against you guys who have always just assumed that the suffering servant in second Isaiah is just Israel, and and he's going, nope. He's like, there's some traction to this idea, but how far back do we track that, right?
Right.
And here's where things get fuzzy. Like Boyarin and I agree that in the rabbinic period, this is
post-Christianity.
This is the medieval period.
Christianity kind of had a big influence on Jews throughout history, just saying. But anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, for sure. So, but there, in this period, Isaiah 53 was being used as a template for certain beliefs about a suffering Messiah. And I think a lot of that has to do with other stuff that's going on with Jewish communities in the Christian Roman Empire.
Right.
A lot of it. I mean, we don't have a lot. I
can't
get
a lot
into
of people who are wanting me. There's people who go, you need to destroy the Talmud and the Mishnah and I'm like, and the Tosefta, and I'm like, dude, because I'm critical of the Hebrew Bible, and I'm like, that's a whole nother headache to try and go through and dismantle. But they'll pull out passages where Gentiles are half. They don't, they're animals. They don't have the spirit. They don't have it. Like it's super derogatory toward Gentiles. And when I ask other scholar friends, like Justin Sledge, hey, what's going on here with these really very xenophobic or even derogatory toward people who aren't Jews, non-Jews? He's like, this does not give them any this doesn't protect them from what they said being okay, but in a real sense, these Jews who write this hatred toward Gentiles are actually being under persecution and literally being abused by much of the Christian dominant culture. And so their hate in the Talmud or in the, they're talking about the, my brain's mush right now, but a lot of the esoteric literature and Jewish writings and stuff that comes later, they're writing a lot of that. And it's under that kind of pressure that you might have hate. I mean, that's kind of expected, to be honest. Like, I know I wouldn't say something nice if I was in those kind of shoes either. So let's not be hypocrites, but you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the
Kabbalah. Yep.
Sorry, what was I? Yeah.
Thank you.
So, notice also what he's arguing against. And I'll just actually, let me put this on the screen here. So this is from another part in Boyarin's book. Actually, not another part. It's in the same section on Isaiah 53. But notice who he's arguing against here. Here's what he says. Okay. It has been generally assumed that by modern folks that Jews have always given this passage a metaphorical reading, understanding the suffering servant to refer to the people of Israel, and that it was the Christians who changed and distorted its meaning to make it refer to Jesus. Quite to the contrary, we now know that many Jewish authorities, maybe even most until the early modern period, have read Isaiah 53 as being about the Messiah. Until the last few centuries, the allegorical reading was the minority position. Now, so Boyarin's point here is twofold. He says the Christian depiction of the suffering Christ is at home within Jewish exegetical tradition, right? Second, he also notes that the earliest rabbinic interpretations of Isaiah 53 view this text as messianic, but importantly, throughout this and his presentation is discussion with John, he importantly notes that it can't be reliably dated much earlier than the 4th century. When he talks about it being earlier than it's recorded than when it was recorded in the Babylonian Talmud, that's what he's talking about. He's saying it's earlier than that, 4th to 6th century, but we don't know how far. And then he does say that he thinks this is a tradition that is pre-Christian, and that's probably the biggest disagreement he and I have. That's something that I think needs to be proven. What he's doing is he's saying we see it in the Gospels, we see it in the New Testament, and then we also see it much later in this rabbinic literature. So it's we can assume that maybe this is something that was common, even though we don't have any texts to show this.
I'll just say this, and you might agree with me on this. You might not, and I don't. It doesn't matter. But by the way, everybody, just in case you're wondering, me and Kip don't agree on everything. I know that seemed to be the case, right? No, we're not always on the same page with stuff, but we understand each other, and that's important. That at least we have a way of getting why we think the way we do. It would not shock me if there were Jews, even up to the 1st century, before the 1st century, a minority of Jews, I'd say, because we obviously don't have extant writings about it, other than when we see the Christian, documents arise, where they found this in their own contemporary period and found meaning in applying this to a person that they might have thought was a Messiah, but didn't make it to print. It wouldn't shock me if that was an option, but I can't bank on it. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if they're looking and hunting as Pesher. I mean, look, that's what they do with Pesher. They find meaning. And this is one of the things for me, I told you yesterday, day before, when I was on the phone with you, saying one of the things that made me think a historical Jesus made a lot of sense to me was how they put this passage to this guy. if I was to whole cloth invent Jesus, I wouldn't need to pressure it on this level and where it doesn't fit quite. It's like they're forcing the square peg into the round hole to make him match the suffering servant and stuff. And it wouldn't be.
It's not always a great fit, right?
Right.
Or even
So
most of the time.
What happened is he dies. He's important. They believed he was a Messiah, and they went, damn, how do we explain this? And so now they have a way in which they reconcile it through Pesher.
Yeah. No, you're right about that. So I'm wondering, before we move on, maybe should we do a couple of these super chats before they pile up? So I'm just gonna pull some of these up. Jesus Tales for $5, thank you, says that Cyric says Jesus is a good name for a soter, Greek for savior. What is the Hebrew version of soter? It could be a variation of a couple of different names that we know from the Hebrew Bible. Yehoshua, Yeshayahu, those are the big ones. I'm Yeshiach. So these are all variations on the verb meaning to deliver, and all of them tend to mean something in line with Yahweh saves or salvation of Yahweh. So, and it is a great name for a savior. But thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Ronan of Stag, who's one of my generous patrons. Hey, all badass peeps. Just checking in to say hey and send some support. 10 times 4 saying awesome and keeping up great work. Catch you around again soon. Thanks very much, Ronan. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Big Boy for £5 in OHJ 60. These definitions are not intended to be normative, but what he means, as long as you understand that, so the confusion will be forestalled. But I think this is a problem, because if you're just going to use definitions to serve the purposes of your own theory, you're not dealing in good faith with the way these concepts actually functioned in antiquity. I think it's a critical problem. And I understand the Carrier has said that the definitions are what he means with regards to his perspective of what the Messiah was. But again, if this is not clearly reflective of the literature in the period, I just don't see how it can work. I just don't. I'm sorry. So I don't know. But thank you for the super chat.
Thank you.
Vesper, is it useful to point out the Genesis Apocryphon retains a more traditional, non-messianic view of Melchizedek as an historical priest and king? Sure, yeah. And I think again, like we are certainly dealing with varieties of traditions. Not all Jews were apocalypticists, certainly not on the level of the writers and the collectors of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and a lot of their literature actually reflects a wider perspective, a broader perspective of Judaism that isn't so narrowly fiercely apocalyptic. But yeah, I even just recently I even read a paper that was published maybe 10 years ago, little more, about that text that we talked about earlier, 11Q13, the Melchizedek scroll from Qumran, and the author was arguing that it had a much more naturalistic historical interpretation, and she actually made the argument that the Melchizedek figure is the same figure as the Mashiach HaRuach, the Messiah mentioned in Daniel, and that it actually was Onias III.
Right.
But then, made this important caveat that then, in many respects completely strips any kind of messianic interpretation of that text. Now, I don't agree with her. I think there are major problems with her reading and her interpretation of this manuscript, but I mention that just to point out that sometimes, there is conjecture and dispute and open discussion even about whether or not something can be messianic. So a couple more here and then we'll move on. Robert Manahe, thank you for the $10. Another one from Big Boy. A couple more from Big Boy. Could a rabbi think the name of the Messiah can derive from the passage without also thinking the Messiah was the one being talked about there? Could the rabbi think the name of the Messiah can derive from the passage without also thinking the Messiah is... Sure. I mean, anything's possible, right? Name of the
Which
Messiah
passage?
derived. I'm assuming he's talking about Isaiah 53.
Oh, okay.
And I have no problem with that, without also thinking that the Messiah was the one being talked about there. Yeah, I would agree with that, but this is stuff that you have to demonstrate from the text, what's going on. So, and as far as I'm aware, the understanding of the Sanhedrin passage has to do with, they're riffing on these Old Testament passages as ways to suggest characteristics of who they think the Messiah will be, without necessarily agreeing that with all of them. One of the key features of the Babylonian Talmud in particular is that it retains this idea of an expensive, never-ending conversation and debate. But yeah, thank you for the super chat.
Thank you.
One more and we'll move on. Mr. Warlight, thank you for the $5. Is Isaiah related to Hosea? That's another one. Hoshea is related from is from the same verb, given how both stress the importance of honoring Yahweh, and these perhaps related by a king of the same name, Josiah. So related in what sense? I think first Isaiah, lots of the Hebrew prophets are in conversation with earlier Hebrew prophets, right? So Hosea is generally regarded to be the first of the Hebrew prophets, the first surviving literary prophet that we have, and scholars have noted patterns in a handful of the oracles that appear in Hosea, also in First Isaiah. So that would be the 8th century Isaiah. So yes, most prophets stress honoring Yahweh. You should, I'd prefer maybe if you were a little bit more specific about what you mean by that, because that can mean a lot of stuff, and it's a prevalent theme through all the prophetic literature. And whether or not this is related to Josiah, I think if you read First Isaiah and if you read Hosea, they're dealing with a slightly earlier time period. There's a few different political things that are going on. This is the Syro-Ephraimite wars and the invasion of Assyria and the destruction of the northern kingdom. These are all themes, ideas, motifs, background information to First Isaiah and Hosea. the reforms of Josiah belong to a period in time about 100 years later. I think that there's clearly an historical political connection just by virtue of the events that took place between the rule of Hezekiah and his great grandson Josiah. Was Hezekiah, then Manasseh, then Ahaz, then Josiah. There's a lot of stuff that took place over that 125 year period, which substantially contributed to the reforms of Josiah. And I would say that they do reflect some of what's in Isaiah, because I think Isaiah is he's reporting, or he's promoting a particular form of religion and politics that that characterizes Hezekiah's rule, that is essentially undone by Manasseh, and then Josiah is trying to get back to that, right? He's trying to get back to the stuff that Hezekiah was doing. But yeah, it's a good question. There's a lot in there. I can't really take the time to dive more into it now, but thank you. I don't know. You got anything, Derek, or should we continue?
Just keep going.
All right. So I'm going to bring the video back. We're going to go back now. We went through Boyarin's stuff about Isaiah 53 in his book, and now John is going to talk to him about it in his interview. And it would be helpful for me to actually put that on the stage, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So here we go. And all right.
So what I did was I asked Dr. Daniel Boyarin specific questions concerning the claims that Dr. Kip Davis was making, specifically whether or not the rabbis that composed the Talmud considered Isaiah 52 and 53 to be messianic on the whole, rather than atomized. Here's what he had to say. But in the Talmud, I know I read in your book that you mentioned a few verses that seem to reference the Messiah, and I'm just wondering, like, do you still think that there are references in the Talmud to like a pre-Christian idea of the Messiah?
Absolutely. And a pre-Christian suffering Messiah. It turns on the question of Isaiah 53, right?
Okay.
Which, if they'll tell you in school, in church school or Hebrew school, that the difference is that Jews think that the suffering servant is the Jewish people, right? Oh, Gewalt, it's so terrible. And Christians will say, no, it's a clear reference to the Messiah, right? That's the school child version. But the fact is, there are multiple early Jewish texts that read Isaiah 53 as being about the Messiah.
Okay. I'll remind you that Boyarin is talking about the rabbinic traditions of a suffering Messiah, right? Now, he and I likely differ. Sorry, what was that?
Yeah. I was going to say it almost seemed to be implied that he's thinking early, and that it could easily be taken as like pre-Christian Jewish literature that has a suffering servant Messiah in Isaiah 53, and it's not Israel. That's what it seems like. You could walk away from him saying that he thinks there's something early of a suffering Messiah in Isaiah 53.
Yes. And this is something, so this is one of my personal frustrations with Boyarin's writing is he's not altogether clear all the time about how early he thinks this is. And what, when he'll say things like pre-Christian, but then he'll also, just kind of leave that open-ended. And like, this is where he and I likely differ. And it's in terms of how early we date some of these. Now, one of the things that we absolutely agree on is that the appeals by Jewish commentators to Isaiah 53 do not presuppose the death of the Messiah. And it's interesting. So this is actually in this interview that Godless Engineer did with Dr. Boyarin. he actually asked him this question, and he didn't include it in this particular video that he made here. So he asked him specifically about this question of the dying Messiah.
The exact wording in your book is that the notion of a humiliated and suffering Messiah was not at all alien within Judaism before Jesus, but that particular part seems to omit the word dying. And I'm just wondering if dying was always seen as being part of the Messiah's, like, I guess, prophesied about the Messiah.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think so, right? But I think suffering, humiliated, sick nearly unto death, all of these things can be found in Jewish sources that are not Christian.
Okay.
And
okay,
not so sure about. I mean, the concept of the death and resurrection of the beloved Son is a very ancient Jewish notion, but the combination of that figure with the Messiah is a development. I think that the idea of a failed and humiliated Messiah, which a lot of people will say, "Oh, it's impossible. No Jews could possibly have believed in it." Well, of course, Jews did believe in it because all of the Christians were Jews. Sometimes people tell me, Christians come up to me and say, "So how come Jews rejected Jesus?" So I say, "Who do you think accepted Jesus?"
They would have been Jews. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Jews don't agree on stuff.
Okay. So again, now my specific charge against Carrier and GE with regards to their misreading of Boyarin hinges critically on this point. Carrier says, even before Christianity arose, some Jews expected one of their messiahs heralding the end times would actually be killed rather than be immediately victorious, and this would mark the key point of a timetable guaranteeing the end of the world soon after. In an accompanying footnote, he claims that essentially the same conclusion is argued by rabbinic scholar Daniel Boyarin, and then includes, a citation to Boyarin's book, The Jewish Gospels. But that's not what Boyarin is saying. Boyarin is saying that this idea of a suffering Messiah is a Jewish idea that we can see in the Talmud and seems to appear much earlier. And then he also claims that that he thinks it's pre-Christian, but there's no evidence for that.
So you know what? I bit the bullet, man. I just emailed him myself, and
nice, very good.
I think there's ways that I won't edit it. I mean, if I edit, it's literally to like polish it, make it look good. But like, I think that an interview needs to be done where and if he responds back, I'll say, hey, grab all your sources, the earliest sources you have of Jewish, non-Christian material of the suffering Messiah interpretation of Isaiah 53 and any other possible suffering Messiah passages that take a spin that's awfully similar to Christian interpretations, or at least in some way like that are not Christian. And I'd like to see if we can count on one hand how many passages he comes up with and where they're at. And are they disputed by other academics that are specialists in that area that aren't Talmudic, that are actually experts in the Dead Sea, or they're experts in other Jewish literature? This is what I like to do. And so not saying that maybe one of them are. Maybe you're wrong about something, Kip. Maybe there is this one thing, right?
I've been wrong before, dude.
Yeah. Just figure I'd let you know that. I just emailed him.
Yeah. Nice. Well, that's cool. And in a little bit, we'll play another clip, and then we'll get to some of this. But I have some things to say about the interpretation of Isaiah 53 prior to the rabbinic literature, and I think this is important.
Okay.
The most common rabbinic traditions read it as being about the Messiah.
Okay. Now, I've pointed that out to some people, and they typically come back to me by saying that the Talmud only records Jewish ideas and traditions that are post-Christianity, so they were influenced by Christian thought. Do you think that's true? And if not, how can we know which traditions precede Christianity and which are influenced by Christianity?
Right. We don't. If people prefer to think that these ideas were influenced by Christianity, fine, let them. The point is that it is not a distinction between Judaism and Christianity, how you read Isaiah 53. As it is simply not the case that before the early modern period that most or all Jews read it as being about the people of Israel, and most or all Christians read it as being about the Messiah, because there were perfectly Orthodox Jews who had received traditions that indicated that it was the Messiah that was being spoken of there. So whether it's an intertwining of traditions, who got from whom, is a less interesting question to me than the fact that these are shared traditions.
Oh, wow. So let me get this straight. It seems like the expert in Talmudic studies, as well as Jewish literature, seems to agree with Dr. Carrier and I about the literal words that he uses in his own book. The sections in the Talmud that have been discussed in these clips today definitely reference Isaiah 52 and 53 as being messianic. And this would have been a tradition that actually reaches pretty far back in the past.
So, you got something to say? Go ahead.
Just, I really think I'm going to want to definitely interview this guy and go deep and see what he says. I do think, based on your first suggestion of him writing in response to the Tovia Singers of the world, he is clearly nailing this. It's not just Israel.
Yeah.
And you know what? He's not the first. I've actually interviewed what's her name? Professor. She's emeritus AJ Levine, who also has said this.
Yeah.
She says, no, it wasn't always Israel. It was not always the interpretation of Isaiah 53. Many Jews understood it as an individual who suffered. But like he said in this interview, which I don't know how that got missed in there, a sick person, he gets injured, he's weak, but not a dying one. So,
very importantly,
important context, I think.
And also, I don't think anybody, and I've certainly never disputed that Babylonian Talmud Sanhedrin 98b considers Isaiah 53 as messianic. Like, the question has always been about whether or not the rabbis, let me quote Carrier here again, explicitly say the suffering servant who dies in Isaiah 53 is the Messiah, and that this Messiah will endure great suffering before his death. This is absolutely not something with which Boyarin agrees.
Right.
Nor do I. Nor does any scholar that I know of. But, on this question of the tracing the origins of specific rabbinic traditions, it's kind of interesting because Boyarin actually talks about this, and there's ways in which scholars do it, right? So I'm just going to share a couple of things here. Everyone can see that. I'm going to skip this, but it actually has to run through the whole thing, so bear with me. Okay, so this is basically what he had to say about Isaiah 53 in Babylonian Sanhedrin 98b. But what is this? Oh, this is coming. Why is that coming now? Sorry. Oh yeah, here we go. The problem here is that we don't have a lot of access to Jewish texts from the time between the writing of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Mishnah, right? And the Mishnah was composed sometime after 200 CE. Within our earliest sources, which are the Dead Sea Scrolls, we also have a handful of Jewish so-called Apocrypha and Pseudepigrapha. There is a clear absence of much reflection on the messianic character of Isaiah 53. So there's that tiny handful of places where anything from Isaiah 53 is cited in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And in those places, it's always the same verse, and it's not even really cited so much as just language is borrowed from it. Here's one. This is from the Chodayot column 12, lines 8 to 9. For they flatter themselves with words, and mediators of deceit lead them astray, so that they are ruined without knowledge. For their works are deceitful, their good works were rejected by them. Neither did they esteem me when you displayed your might through me. So the word there, esteemed, is the same very rare word that appears in Isaiah 53, verse 3, where they did not regard the servant who suffered. They drove me out of my land as a bird from its nest. So this is a song, a poem that most scholars consider to have been written probably by the teacher of righteousness, describing his own trials as a Jewish religious reformer. And what he's doing here is he's just applying the suffering from Isaiah 53 not to a Messiah, but to himself. Right? He's just using the language from Isaiah 53 to describe his own suffering. So I got another one here.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So this is from another collection of the hymns that appear in the Chodayot, but this one isn't in the Chodayot. This is from a manuscript called 4Q471b. I am reckoned with the gods, and my dwelling place is in the holy congregation. Who is considered as contemptible as I am, and who is despised like me, and who like me is rejected by men? So that's Isaiah 53, verse 3. And to whom shall you compare me in my teaching? So again, this is a song where the author, probably the teacher of righteousness, is just describing his own suffering and applying Isaiah 53 to that suffering. So, yeah, that's all that's going on there. So here's the point, right? The point is that in our earliest traditions, where Isaiah 53 is reflected on, excuse me, it doesn't seem to be about the Messiah. So, what did I say? So yeah, the observation aligns. This observation, I would say, aligns quite seamlessly with the earlier one I made, that within the Dead Sea Scrolls, and maybe within broader Second Temple Judaism, as far as we know, the term Mashiach is consistently applied to figures other than the Messiah, such as prophets, anointed by the Spirit of God. So the question must be raised. If the feature of Isaiah 53 as a description of messianic suffering is dominant, it's a dominant reading within early Judaism, then why do none of the pre-Christian Jewish texts retain this reading? Because none of them do. Weird things are going on here, Derek. Sorry.
Satan is trying to...
He sure is.
So,
so yeah, from our earliest period, it looks like Isaiah 53 was being read not about the Messiah, but just about suffering for people in general, specific people. So, and it's interesting. So this last one from 4Q471b is really interesting because this is part of what's often also called the self-glorification hymn, which appears in another manuscript, 4Q491, and it's it's been revised in such a way as to emphasize the I guess the sort of the what's the word I'm looking for? The elevated state of this individual. You notice how he says, I'm reckoned with the gods. My dwelling is in the holy congregation. In this other version, which seems to be a later version, it actually equates the figure with a divine being. But very interestingly, in that same version, this reference to Isaiah 53 is gone. So,
So it's trying to find the perfect combination of details we see within Christianity for any interpretations by Jews of Isaiah 53 is going to be very hard if there are even any other than Christian sources. Because when I was doing the research recently, we've got a collaboration coming right now where my buddy Stephen Ford, who's on Facebook, I'm sure you're friends with him as well, somewhere on there. We're doing on messianic prophecies and how Jesus didn't actually fulfill these prophecies that Christians say they fulfilled, from born of a virgin, and we go through like the passages, but the real hitter is the Isaiah 53 in the very end of the documentary.
Right.
In it, Christians will go to other sources to try and prove their point. One of them is the Targum of Jonathan, and then that's not as old as the Wisdom of Solomon. And in the Wisdom of Solomon, it uses Isaiah 53, and there's several scholars that I quote here, but it's a suffering of a particular individual who is not dying in this case. Isn't there's so it's like it's the perfect storm of material that you get. And if we found that in other characters before Jesus, that'd be interesting. I would love to see where that is. That's why I interviewed Boyarin to see if he's probably going to go, oh, no. They were struggling. But I'd like to see, hey, are there any struggling, suffering messiahs that aren't prophets, but are seen as the Messiah, as you see in the New Testament, describing this Jesus character? Like, give me examples of this. And he might want to try and break down and go, well, listen, Messiah can mean many things, but I want to try and pin him down to get him to.
I guess you'll have to see when you interview him. Importantly, I mean, a couple things, like Wisdom of Solomon appears to have some echoes from Isaiah 53, but this is not a messianic text.
Right.
In terms of, at least I don't think you have to read it that way. And it's certainly not explicit. It's about how the righteous suffer and then are vindicated, right? I think I saw Simone point this out as well. The Targum Jonathan dates from, after the Bar Kokhba revolt. And the history of the interpretation of Isaiah 53 in that text hinges a lot on what happened in the Bar Kokhba revolt. So it's and one of the things that it does, it completely it treats Isaiah 53 as though it's apocalyptic messianic, but then totally undoes all of the suffering, turns this figure into a conquering ruler, a Davidic king of the last days. So yeah. What's next? So this is a quotation I pulled from Boyarin's book here, The Jewish Gospels, explaining exactly what his point is in focusing on Isaiah 53. As we see, neither Judaism nor Jews have ever spoken with one voice on this hermeneutical theological question, and therefore there is no sense in which the assertion of many sufferings and rejection and contempt for the Son of Man constitutes a break with Judaism or the religion of Israel. Indeed, in the Gospels, these ideas have been derived from the Torah, scripture in its broadest meaning, by that most Jewish of exegetical styles, the way of Midrash. He includes a footnote here. I am not claiming that therefore the followers of Jesus did not originate this particular Midrash. Rather, if and when they did so, the hermeneutical practice they were engaged in bespoke itself the Jewishness of their religious thinking and imagination. So for him, the importance is on the fact that the Gospels are exercising using the same tools and methods in reading their scriptures as were the rest of Judaism, which filters into the later rabbinic period, right? But I think this is important because he just straight out says it, that they might just have originated this particular midrash.
Right. That's kind of what I was trying to get at with you, is like,
Exactly.
okay, suffering servant who dies, who is a Messiah, who is a Davidic king. By the way, that's very important that we spell this out, all this detail, because he is Davidic in Paul. He is Davidic in the Gospels, meaning he is a kingly Messiah.
Yes.
Give me another Jewish source of a kingly Messiah who is going to suffer and die and didn't exist, but only existed in heaven. Like, start adding more layers to it. It becomes less plausible if you don't have any other examples to help, bring that in. And that's my personal, the way I look at it is, what's the most Occam's razor kind of thing? And it exists here in this material that we have a Davidic suffering, dying Messiah figure. So, okay. It could be that this is the pioneered Pesher of the suffering Messiah of the Davidic line. And I'm just interested in seeing if there's other Jewish ones. And I don't know of any right now, but if I can interview him, I want to make sure I'm very explicit and clear on that question to get him to answer.
Excited about the opportunity to interview. Hey, I want to be respectful of your time. So whenever you need to go, you just go ahead.
Well, my wife did peek in the door. She was asking how much longer.
Well,
the real boss, Messiah, the
non-suffering. You go when you need to go.
I will
I'm
suffer.
going to continue until I finish. Really? Wow.
I will suffer, and I promise you, it will be unto death if I don't make the queen.
Dude, I will hold you to that. So,
but what about another 10 minutes, and then I just ghost you, and then I say I'm coming back, and then I wait thousands of years, and I don't.
I'm used to that.
Okay.
So,
all right.
This has happened to me before. All right. So yeah, let's maybe we should before you go, should we make sure we get caught up on the super chats, and then we'll watch like one more segment of the video.
Sure.
And then you'll probably have to take off. All right, Hank Fishy, thank you very much for the $15 super chat. Hank Fishy is one of my patrons. How does the Christian concept of Messiah reconcile the supposedly direct teachings from Jesus? For example, the Lord's Prayer, forgive us for sins as we forgive those. This seems entirely contradictory. Do you understand this? I don't think I do.
Forgive us our sins, we forgive those.
Direct teachings.
I'm wondering if they mean like the death atonement or something, when like here you are just asking for forgiveness in a prayer. Like Jesus comes to atone for sins, for forgiveness of sins, yet he's teaching people, hey, you want to be forgiven? This is what you do. Forgive us our sins as we forgive those. That's all it takes. But now he's here as a Messiah that's supposed to die.
Maybe. And actually, Hank Fishy said exactly. He says you're right, Derek. Okay, good. So, and I mean, I have a couple things that I could propose here. First of all, as any of you in my audience are keenly aware, Christian apologists in particular are excellent at reconciling whatever the hell they need to. So that's that they'll find a way to do it. From an historical perspective, I might suggest that the Lord's Prayer itself, if we have actual teachings of Jesus, this might be one of the more certain ones. And if that's the case, then I think it's also reasonable to think that the historical Jesus and his own self-conception did not match later Christian interpretations of who he was and what he did. So this certainly could fit into that. I think if there was an historical Jesus, he did not conceive of himself as someone who could forgive sins or atone for sin. I think that's stuff that got laden onto him later. So that's how I would handle that. You got anything to say on that, Derek?
Yeah, I mean, unless you find other Jewish sources where a Jewish rabbi figure is forgiving sins, then okay, well, you could go, maybe the Jesus guy did this too. But there's a lot of other reasons Jews aren't running around saying some of the stuff and doing some of the stuff that makes you think that there's literary liberty by the author to craft him a certain way.
There sure is.
Decades later. And in light of my personal take is like, in light of kind of this influx of Gentiles, you might actually find some interesting aspects that aren't so Jewish in the material. But yeah,
exactly. No, that's good. Mushroom Farmers Guild, thank you for the $4.20. God equals Gothic. Gad, Stampy, Noah, Racy. That sounds fun and clever. I'm not sure I fully understand it, but thank you.
I get the 420. I get the 420.
Yeah, I get that too. All right. Not log. Thank you for the $4.99. I can't tell how this is relevant to the historical existence of Jesus. Religious people picking through their mythology can rationalize anything, right? I'm not sure what this is that you're referring to. This stream, it isn't directly relevant to the historical existence of Jesus. It's relevant to the reading of early Jewish literature, and our understanding of messianism and apocalypticism, which informed the Christian the Christian cult, the early Christian movement. So I mean, it's relevant as far as that goes, and I think that also speaks to questions about the historical Jesus, but not directly. So but I do appreciate the $4.99. So
I would just
all right.
add to this, just to say on that super chat, is that religious people picking through their mythology can rationalize anything, right? Yeah. Yeah. But I would also flip it and say people who are so skeptical, so critical that they'll work overtime to almost make everything fit. They'll rationalize everything to fit their skeptical views. Paul didn't exist. And then when you show, well, Paul's got some real like funky letters where he's crying and bitching and moaning. And then if I were with you, I wouldn't be so angry and stuff. Well, that's all fiction. Like, my point is like, you can go all the way and pull the fiction card and then do everything you can to make everything fiction. And it's like, sounds like they're working overtime to rationalize that as well, instead of saying we got a muddy mess here of stuff happening. And the only relevant thing I would say this episode has done for the existence of Jesus has made me realize, if Jesus is within this Jewishness category and he's a Messiah and a Davidic king and a suffering dead one, give me other dying, rising, or even if they don't rise, they were expected to rise, kingly Davidic messianic figures. Like, start adding the layers. Give me other examples. If you don't, then we should probably backpedal and go, okay, there are other figures that are messiahs. Show me ones that didn't exist, that are completely fictive, that are only existing in heaven. That particular version of mythicism. That's the only relevancy I would say. And then the other part is how I would say they're kind of trying to rationalize why this dude died and how that fits into the grand scheme of the end. That might play a role in making you think there might have been a Jesus. You can't prove it. I mean, you can come up with other explanations, but yeah.
No, it's a very good point. Before we watch one more segment of the video, Mushroom Farmers Guild noted that it won't let him super chat 69 cents.
I wonder why they would do that.
Very sad about that. So Anyways, we'll watch one more section with you, Derek. And then, and I am going to follow through and finish
Okay.
after you go. But I do appreciate you coming and hanging out
Of course.
with me.
Ooh, you know,
Yeah.
I appreciate you inviting me.
Awesome. All right. Let's see what's next here.
Are you playing it?
Oh, fuck. Oh, did I just say that?
Dude, I'm sitting here going 10 minutes later from the
let me all right, I'm gonna back this. Let me back it up.
How long do you think, if I didn't say that, everybody in the chat, how long do you think we'd have been there sitting there going like this?
Dude, it's happened to me before. I'm very bad at this. So all right, I gotta make sure. There, I have put it on the stage. You see that?
I see it.
Everyone.
Talmudic studies as well as Jewish literature seems to agree with Dr. Carrier and I about the literal words that he uses in his own book. The sections in the Talmud that have been discussed in these clips today definitely reference Isaiah 52 and 53 as being messianic. And this would have been a tradition that actually,
rabbis were reading the New Testament or saying about rabbinic traditions
after Jesus came and died.
That
Jewish rabbis.
All right.
And Dr. Boyarin can't necessarily concretely say that these interpretations existed prior to Christianity, but he does say this. Well, I was just going to say, it kind of seems odd to me that Jewish rabbis would adopt a tradition that seems to validate, Christian theology after Jesus came and died.
That is more or less my intuition as well.
Mm-hmm.
That if these were dominant rabbinic traditions, it's because they were deeply rooted.
Right.
There's so much that we can't prove in this way.
Important.
I find it a little implausible, as you said, that rabbis were reading the New Testament or Saint Augustine and saying, "Wow, what a cool idea!" Yeah, I think that's what. After previously having read it differently, I think the idea of intertwining and shared traditions is much more acceptable. Now, if that's the case, then they could easily be shared from a time before there was Christianity and Judaism.
Right.
And it seems the preponderance of evidence suggests, but does not prove, that most Jewish readers, or many Jewish readers, read Isaiah 53 as being about the Messiah.
I would say I think it depends on when you're talking about. I think that's much more difficult to prove in the Second Temple period. That seems to be the case at some point in the much later rabbinic period. But I think it's important to notice what Boyarin is saying here, right? It's his intuition. He talks about these dominant traditions being deeply rooted, but there's much we can't prove. He talks about intertwining of shared traditions. The preponderance of evidence suggests, but does not prove. So his point is that ways in which Christians were reading Isaiah 53 is neither novel nor non-Jewish. Like that's primarily his point, right? So in his book, I read that. I read that book. We already saw that in his book where he noted that it's a hermeneutical model that he's interested in. He's interested in the fact that these two groups were reading their text the same way. But something I did want to bring up was another point. Okay. Made by my friend Simone here. On this part of the video. Let's bring this up. Okay. And I'm going to actually stick it on the stage here. There we go. All right. So Oh, I have to play. Okay, here we go. Oh, no, sorry. Let's not do that. Let's go to this one and play. All right. So here's what Simone said. In the interview, he says exactly what I've been saying. He says he thinks there is a pre-Christian suffering Messiah, but it is not proven. And he acknowledges this in a couple places in the video. He does not say decisively that the evidence requires one to affirm this position. One can infer it, but one is doing so from scant evidence, and that evidence includes the Christian writings, explicitly the Gospels, given the title of Boyarin's book. There is no dispute, at least among serious scholars, that there is substantial and undeniable continuity between the early Christian literature and pre-Christian Judaism. Many speak of early Christian literature as being within Judaism, but that does not mean that it is not innovating, as Judaism did both before and after the birth of the Christian movement. The question is what the nature and extent of these innovations is, and different reading strategies and levels of skepticism will support different conclusions based on this sparse evidence. So she's just reiterating the point here that Boyarin's book is predominantly about method.
Mm-hmm.
It's about how these various groups were reading their texts, and it's to show that Christianity was thoroughly Jewish,
Right?
which is something that I think the vast majority of scholars would agree with, without insisting that the suffering servant, that the Jewish depiction of the suffering servant is something that was already ingrained within early Judaism specifically, right? And again, we just don't have any evidence for that.
I'd be
Not
happy to, like, this is the heart of the problem, right? So
yeah,
John walked away from that interview saying, look, he agrees with us, meaning him and Dr. Carey on this. You're walking away from watching it going, look, he agrees with me. We might have discrepancies, but look, he agrees with me. And so I kind of want to go in there and like really get down and flesh out this detail into specifics with him. And, you know, I imagine, as our friend here has written that you're just now discussing, Simone, right? Yeah, Simone.
Yeah.
That he's going to say, I think, or it might be, and these are the kinds of things that might end up coming out of it. And then I might ask, well, since it might be, is it also likely or plausible that the Christian Pesher, whoever, originated this concept of the Davidic dying and rising Messiah figure? Or do you think this predated it? And if you do, what hints in any Jewish literature do you have of that? And so this is the kind of conversation I want to have, because it feels like if it's not spearheading the detail, like directly hitting the question and getting to the point.
Yeah, totally. If you do have a conversation with him, one thing I would encourage you also to get into, and I'm switching gears here, is into historical criticism in the Talmud,
right?
Which is really interesting, and how do we understand where these traditions came from? How do we date this stuff? How do we handle this responsibly from an historical perspective? He actually talks about this in another book. He wrote a book called Borderlines in 2006, and he makes a compelling argument for identifying what we call pre-Amoraic traditions. So the Amoraic traditions are from like 450 to 650. So anything before 450 CE. And the Amoraic traditions are largely in Talmud Bavli, or the Babylonian Talmud. Now, he says that we can identify stuff that's earlier than that, on the basis of their parallels that appear in the other Talmud, the Palestinian Talmud. Here's what he says. He says it like this: the realization of the crucial role of the late redactors, and these are what are called the anonymous stamayim. These are the redactors and the compilers of that are unique to the Babylonian Talmud. Okay, and they're usually identified by just like the rabbis or the Ravnan, and you'll notice that interpretation in Babylonian Sanhedrin 58b, which attached this Isaiah 53 to this figure, the student of Judah Hanasi. This was mentioned by the Ravnan. This was the Stamayim, the this layer of redactors that we find in the Babylonian Talmud. So, informing the rhetorical structures of the Talmud, when put together with the increasingly appreciated role in shaping the Talmudic legends, especially about Yavna, and the historical insight that the institutional yeshiva is also a product of this period, providing us with a powerful historical hypothesis and an attractive historical context for the formation of major structures of rabbinic Judaism when in the late 5th and 6th centuries.
So we just need to get as early. I'm going to see if I'll email him, and if he responds and we can set it up, I'll email him and I'll say, can you get me your earliest messianic interpretations of Isaiah 53? And let's go from there. And in each of those, I don't want to get too much specifics yet. I want him to just pull out like the best earliest he knows that aren't just Talmudic or rabbinic, but predate that even. Do you have anything that you think of that might be something you would want to get? And then we'll get into the specifics about Davidic, dying, all of these kinds of things, coming back, even expectations of resurrection, dying and rising kind of concept, or any of that. Like just to dive into this material with him, I would like to do. And I might actually try to introduce a little, this is probably outside of his skill because he's focused so purely on Jewish material only. And no one doubts that the Gospels, I've never met a single classicist mixed New Testament scholar who doubts the Gospels are fully enriched, immersed in Jewish thought or in Jewish scripture. None of them do that. Even the Dennis McDonalds of the world, none of them do that. So asking questions outside of that might be a waste of time, in my opinion, because they're so deeply entrenched in Hebrew and Jewish thought that they don't already see how Hellenistic Jewish thought may be at this time, that when you do introduce concepts that might be foreign from Jewish writings that predate it, could it be introduced from other sources? Like eat my flesh, drink my blood. Give me a single Jewish source ever that ever tells you, especially your Messiah is saying to do that. You know what I mean?
There are not necessarily eating my flesh and drinking my blood, but certainly the breaking of the bread.
Of course.
At Passover as representative of what's that? Yeah. So, but I mean, there's other elements at play there, right? So
it's Jew, but that's the thing that's interesting about it. Like, homophagia, which was a literal practice done by the Maenads in Dionysus worship, would consume the flesh of a. This probably never really happened literally, but they were said to consume the raw flesh of an animal. And the Greek there in John's gospel says to chew the flesh, chew his flesh, and drink his blood. This is very interesting to me because I see the ingestion of the deity of Dionysus with the Maenads. There's all sorts of reasons with the water into wine and Cana. I mean, like we can go on and on about the miracles of Dionysus with wine. Like I see elements of both happening. So is it, instead of trying to look for a Jewish, let's spin the question, and Boyarin may not be the person to ask in particular
Probably
about this,
not the person,
but what if the introduction of some of these concepts are foreign, is my point. They aren't from a Jewish antecedent, or there aren't any clear examples because we're dealing with a strange piece of literature that, of course, is introducing something new and unique in how it's mixing both. I don't know. I mean, I'm just throwing questions out there, but
Right.
it's just funny to see John's walking away from the interview fully persuaded that Boyarin's on his side and like agrees with him and isn't agreeing with you, which we are. It's rank nonsense, whatever.
Errant rank nonsense.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'd actually love if I can get him on. I'd love to have you jump in.
Sure.
And then just say,
Yeah,
hey,
be happy to
here's
do
what
that
I
too.
said, and not to stir up the drama, but to clarify because you're an academic and he's in the field as well. So
right. So I was going to just draw some attention to how Boyarin, identifies late traditions versus early traditions here. Okay.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
So no, that's cool. So he continues: institution, yeshiva, founding structures of rabbinic, and the instituting text, the Talmud, theological innovation, indeterminacy of meaning and halakhic argument, and practice, endless study as worship in and of itself, all come together at this time to reproduce the rabbinic Judaism familiar to us until this day. The Talmudic redactors were so successful at hiding themselves that they were able to retroject these patterns and make it seem as if they were a product of a real Yavna in the first century. The Palestinian
isn't that what they
Talmud
do?
seems...
Aren't they drawing back? They're acting like they have a genealogical, like this rabbi told this rabbi and taught this rabbi.
Oh, yeah, totally. And
Yeah.
they're inserting this stuff back into the distant past. But here's how you can see it. The Palestinian Talmud seems to consider the determination and correctness of one of the views of paramount importance, as did apparently the earlier strata of Babylonian rabbinism. So this is from the period 200 to 450 AC. So he's saying basically that the Palestinian Talmud is different, where there's not these endless this endless stream of unresolved debate in the text, right? The Palestinian Talmud is more focused on coming to resolutions on things, whereas for the anonymous redactional voice in the Babylonian Talmud, it is most often the case that such an apparent proof of one view is considered a difficulty, a kushia, requiring a resolution, which in fact shows that there is no resolution. For these and these are the words of the living God. David Kramer writes that this contrast in overall compositional preference may be the most important difference between the Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, and the Yerushalmi, or the Palestinian Talmud. So the way in which to track the antiquity of what Bavli is, or antiquity of what is in the Bavli, is by comparison to the earlier parallels in Yerushalmi, in the Jerusalem or the Palestinian Talmud, right? And Boyarin does just this, and it's kind of interesting. In this same book, the Jewish Gospels, he does just this on the next page after discussing Isaiah 53, which the same couple of pages that both Godless Engineer and Carrier love to cite. But he does this to demonstrate that one of Carrier's proof of concept texts, which is Babylonian Talmud Tractate Sukkah 52a to b, is undeniably post-Christian and actually counter-apologetic. I just want to show you this. So first, this is what Carrier says about Sukkah 52a to b. The Talmud likewise has a dying rising Christ, son of Joseph ideology in it, even saying, quoting Zechariah 12:10, that the Messiah will be pierced to death. Modern scholars are too quick to dismiss this text as late, dating as it does from the 4th to 6th century, since the doctrine it describes is unlikely to be. But that's not why they reject it as late. It's much more involved than that. For only when Jews had no idea what Christians would do with this connection would they themselves have promoted it. There is no plausible way, he says, that later Jews would invent interpretations of their scripture that supported the vindication of Christianity. They would not invent a Christ with a father named Joseph who dies and is resurrected, as the Talmud indeed describes. Now, here's what Boyarin says about this particular text. The Palestinian Talmud, not the Babylonian Talmud,
which is
commenting
the more reliable earlier.
The earlier one, right? Commenting on the biblical passage and the land shall mourn, that's Zechariah 12:12, cites two Amoraic opinions. Now, remember, these are third to 5th century, the Amora, right? One Amora who interprets this is the mourning over the Messiah, and one who disagrees, arguing that it is the mourning over sexual desire that has been killed in the Messianic age. And that's all it says about it. Now, Boyarin includes this in a footnote. He says, this version, the Palestinian Talmud version, is almost certainly anterior to the Babylonian Talmud's parallel, which indicates that it is the Messiah, son of Joseph, for whom they are mourning. This alternative Messiah, known only from the Babylonian Talmud and later texts, seems precisely to represent a sort of apologetic way of avoiding the implications of earlier traditions with which the Messiah suffers and or is slain, such as is clear from the Palestinian Talmud version of this tradition. So basically what he's saying is the Palestinian Talmud tradition was expanded in the Babylonian Talmud to be this Christ, son of Joseph, who would be pierced to death. The reason they did that was almost as a bit of a thumbing of the nose at Christianity, because they have a Christ, son of Joseph, who dies. Right. So it's so basically what Boyarin is pointing out here is he's illustrating how to do historical criticism in the rabbinic texts. You look at what's in the Palestinian Talmud and compare it to the parallels in the Babylonian Talmud, and you can see the development that's taking place. And then you can also probably infer why that's happening.
So if it's diverging from the Palestinian between the 3rd century on to the 6th century, and you could see maybe even Christian adversarial,
totally right. And this is how critical rabbinic scholars tend to read this stuff,
right?
As working on a polemic.
Yeah, so that's why it's hard to, especially when you're dealing with material late like that. It's very difficult for one not to think there's likely awareness of the Christian mythos in how you're formulating your literary, even if some Jews found in positive light interpretations through this kind of pesher. You have to think, okay, well, do they know about the well-known politically, literally legalized religion of the Roman Empire at this time that's clearly persecuting them in some way, and that they have found ways to also interpret that way? Or maybe they had good Christian neighbors who had this kind of interpretation through their religion. I mean, whatever the context, I think it's hard to not think, after Christianity on the rise, and it's now literally spread all over the known world, that an interpretation like the Christian one within Jewish sources of Isaiah 53 or whatever isn't more likely due to that influence than it is to suggest, oh, it's just a completely independent, never had independence, no awareness. Then if I found earlier non-Christian sources predating Christianity, sure. I mean, what's up? It'd be odd to know why we don't have a ton of those. Maybe there's just not enough writings around that exist between the pre-Christian source and post-Christianity. But look, I'm open to it, man. I imagine you are too, but
oh yeah.
People might say you're too close to the fire, right? I'm saying I'm legit, I have no dog in this fight. It's,
Sure. No, that's true. I'm gonna move on in the video. If you need to jump
I do, but I need to give a shout out to someone who became a member of my channel, Real Bill P. They joined my membership thing.
I can do this. Here we go.
Thank you for becoming a member. Just so everybody knows, I'm trying to shift more attention to interviews and live streams and stuff over to Myth Vision TV, and wanting to try and make Myth Vision Podcast, the main channel, more of my documentaries. So, because the analytics are weird. YouTube's like playing war between, whoa, here's an interview. Oh, here's one of those well-polished, extremely, detailed documentaries. Oh, here's a basic interview again. Oh, it's two different style stuff, and I'm trying to organize them into different places. But thank you for becoming a member of the channel for sure.
Thank you, Real Bill P. Awesome. Cool.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming and hanging out, Derek.
Absolutely, man.
I haven't done anything in a while.
It's been a minute. We have more to do. You have a course we've done as well on real ancient Israelite religion, which is fantastic. If anyone is interested in taking a course further, of course, take it on mvp-courses.com. And Kip, let me know what you hear through the grapevine. I'll let you know if he emails me. You can even give me some questions that help nail down into the specifics, so that we can get, I don't want to just, because I might ask a question, then it derails from that point that needs to be addressed. So we'll keep in touch.
Totally. All right. Thanks, man.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.
All right. So we're going to continue. I'm going to pull up the video again here. And next we're going to talk about this idea of atomization. So this is the way, I think I might have described it this way initially. This is the idea that when Jewish readers read their scriptures, very often, if not, pretty consistently, they would focus on just the text of scripture that they would quote in order to provide interpretation to it. If you want to posit that they had a more expansive view, which included, whole paragraphs, whole chapters, I think that's something that needs to be demonstrated. And there are places maybe that you can make arguments for that, but by and large, as scholars, we deal with the texts as they are presented to us. So let's see what Godless Engineer and Daniel Boyarin have to say about this.
Now, what Kip is describing is more accurately described as edomization. This would be the claim that the rabbis of the Talmud hyper-focused in on certain verses from Isaiah 52 and 53 and made those about the Messiah, essentially creating a petrum, rather than the rabbis of the Talmud considering the whole of the 52 and 53 suffering servant section as being messianic. Basically, he thinks that the rabbis divorced these very minute passages in Isaiah 52 and 53 from the surrounding context. When I asked Dr. Boyarin about this atomization without actually using the word atomization, he seemed to be quite confused as to what I was describing. I've cited your work pretty heavily in my videos concerning these topics, and one of the criticisms about your work is that
So I'm pausing it here because I just have to say this. This is not my criticism of Boyarin's work at all. This statement is directed at how Carrier, I believe, misunderstands most of the Jewish literature he's reading, and how he misrepresents scholars like Boyarin as if he's just repeating their claims, and he's not really. He's filtering a lot of the claims that he's seeing in secondary literature through his own ideas about early Judaism. I'll remind you that Boyarin absolutely does not agree that even before Christianity arose, some Jews expected one of their messiahs heralding the end times would actually be killed rather than immediately victorious. The reason he does not agree with this is because in the Babylonian tractate he cites, which includes the one verse from Isaiah chapter 53, there is no dying Messiah. And I would say that positing that my words are criticisms of Boyarin is just errant rank nonsense. I'm continuing.
And I'm quoting right now, the rabbis in B Sanhedrin 98b have no interest in the suffering servant beyond the one verse in Isaiah 53. Moreover, they do not cite Isaiah 53 at all in B Sanhedrin 93b. It's also claimed that this suggests that your reading is demonstrably incorrect.
Not Boyarin's reading. Carrier's reading is demonstrably incorrect because he's the one who is inserting a dying Messiah into Babylonian Sanhedrin 98b instead of just reading what it says in the text and then calling it pre-Christian.
My question is, do you think that the rabbis who composed the Talmud had no interest in a suffering Messiah figure, or they didn't interpret Isaiah 52 and 53 as being messianic?
So notice that John has not actually asked a question about atomization. He's asked specifically about whether the rabbis had any interest in a suffering Messiah or whether they did or did not interpret Isaiah 53 as messianic. As I noted earlier, the idea of the passage being messianic is just extremely vague and can mean virtually anything with reference to the last days. Clearly, the writers of Babylonian Talmud Sanhedrin 98b considered Isaiah 53 messianic because they're talking about the Messiah on the basis of their application of the one verse. It's Isaiah 53 verse 4, to the possible identity of the leper from the house of Nasi. And because he was sick. The point is, we don't know anything about how they read the rest of Isaiah 53 because they don't tell us how they read it.
I think there's plenty of evidence that they did.
Okay.
I wouldn't deny that it's controversial and that those passages in Sanhedrin represent some other tradition. But as canonical and learned a figure as Nachmanides, right, Rabbi Moses ben Nachman,
He's from the 13th century, by the way,
says explicitly that while he disagrees and believes that Isaiah 53 is about the Jewish people, that our rabbis, our holy rabbis of the past, that is of the Talmudic period, believe that it was about the Messiah.
The Talmudic period. You caught that, right? The rabbis of the Talmudic period believed it was about the Messiah, that being the 4th to the 6th centuries CE, so decidedly not pre-Christian.
So I'd say I've got a pretty hefty tree to hang myself from
Right
there.
Do you think that it's a bit of a mistake to sort of hyper focus in on the single passage that's like referenced in the Talmud and saying that, oh, they only thought that one verse was about the suffering servant and not the entirety of like the 52 and 53 suffering servant passages?
I don't know. I'd have to look back at the text again and see. See. But arguments from silence are always dangerous.
So what does Boyarin mean there when he says that arguments from silence are dangerous? Like, I think it seems to me like he's actually agreeing with me that apart from a clear citation of this one's verse, Isaiah 53:4, in Babylonian Talmud Tractate 98, Babylonian Talmud Tractate Sanhedrin 98b, it's dangerous to speculate much about how the entire song fits into the tractate. What he's absolutely not doing is agreeing with GE that it's a mistake to focus on a single passage that's referenced. You know, I can show more clearly here what I mean about atomization by going back and looking at the tractate from the Babylonian Talmud in question. Babylonian Talmud, Sanhedrin 98b. So let's just go back and look at that again here. Okay. Here it is. What is his name? The school of Rabbi Sheala says Shiloh is his name, as it is stated, until when Shiloh shall come. That's from Genesis 49, verse 10. The school of Rabbi Yanai says Yanon is his name, as it is stated. May his name endure forever. May his name continue, Yanon, as long as the sun. That's Psalm 72:17. The school of Rabbi Hanina says Hanina is his name, as it is stated, for I will show you no favor. Jeremiah 16, verse 13. And some say that Menachem ben Hizkiah, is his name, as it is stated, because the comforter, Menachem, that should relieve my soul, is far from me. That's Lamentations 1:16. And the rabbis say this is the Stamayim, right? The redactors of the Babylonian Talmud. The rabbis say the leopard, Hevodah, of the house of Ravi, Yehuda Hanasi, is his name, as it is stated. Indeed, our illnesses, Chelenu, he deber hu nasa, and our pains he endured, yet we did esteem him injured, stricken by God, and afflicted. Several passages are cited in this Bavli tractate, which speculates about the name of the Messiah, in addition to Isaiah 53, verse 4. There's Genesis 49:10, Psalm 72:17, Jeremiah 16:13, and Lamentations 1:16. So the writers clearly have in view these specific verses, and I hope you can see it. I've tried to spell this out because of how words used within them correspond to past Amoraic figures. Now, if GE believes that the rabbis had a broader interest in the messianic implications of the entire servant song in Isaiah 53 beyond just verse 4, does he or does Carrier also think that something like all of Jeremiah's oracle in Jeremiah 16 is also about the Messiah? Here's verse Jeremiah 16, verses 10 to 15. And when you announce all these things to that people and they say, why has Yahweh decreed upon us all this fearful evil? What is the iniquity? What is the iniquity and what is the sin that we have committed against Yahweh our God? Say to them, because your fathers deserted me, declares Yahweh, and followed other gods and served them and worshipped them. They deserted me and did not keep my instruction, and you have acted worse than your fathers, every one of you, following the willfulness of his evil heart and paying no heed to me. Therefore, I will hurl you out of this land to a land that neither you nor your fathers have known, and there you will serve other gods day and night. For I will show you no favor. There's the word there, the specific passage in verse 13 that the rabbis have cited. Assuredly, a time is coming, declares Yahweh, when it shall no more be said, as Yahweh lives, who brought the Israelites out of the land of Egypt, but rather as Yahweh lives, who brought the Israelites out of Northland and out of all the lands to which he banished them. For I will bring them back to the land which I gave to their fathers. Does this have anything to do with what the rabbis are talking about in this tractate, or are they just interested in the neat play on that they can make with the name Hanina? Do they consider all of Lamentations 1 to be about the Messiah? Here's verses 15 to 19 in Lamentations 1. In my midst, he has rejected all my heroes. He has proclaimed a set time against me to crush my young men. As in the press, the Lord has trodden, fair maiden Judah. For these things do I weep. My eyes flow with tears. Far from me is any comforter who might relieve my spirit. That is that's Lamentations. That's verse 16 that is cited by the rabbinic tractate. My children are forlorn, for the foe has prevailed. Zion spreads out her hands. She has no one to comfort her. Yahweh has summoned against Jacob. His enemies all about him. Jerusalem has become among them a thing unclean. Yahweh is in the right, for I have disobeyed him. Hear, all you peoples, and behold my agony. My maidens and my youths have gone into captivity. I cried out to my friends, but they played me false. My priests and my elders have perished in the city as they search for food to keep themselves alive. So both this text and the Jeremiah text have to do with the destruction of Jerusalem and the exile, the Babylonian exile. Are these messianic texts? I think you have to squint pretty hard. And as we can see, the rabbis of the Stamaim very creatively found ways to make these texts messianic, but in so doing, it doesn't mean that the individual little bits that they have cited signal that they have in mind larger sections of these entire texts. So if that's the case, why are we special pleading for Isaiah 53 when the same argument does not work for these other texts? I've got one more to share with you from my friend Simone. In addressing this same point of atomization, she said this: the atomization of Isaiah 53 is clearly evident simply by surveying everywhere where Isaiah 53 is cited in the Talmud and assessing every mention of the Messiah in the Talmud. Sanhedrin 98b is the only explicit messianic citation, and the only implicit citation is 98a. And both of those are dated by Boyarin and Martha Himmelfarb to the 3rd century CE or later. What Boyarin said is both kind of true and not the whole truth. He says nothing about pre-Christian evidence for the use of Isaiah 53 in this way because, as he admits, there is no clear evidence, but rather mulls over the true point that both Jews and Christians have read this passage as messianic. He does believe that this tradition goes back before Christianity, but is one of a handful of scholars who do. That far, far more don't carries more weight. Crucially, he also believes this based on an assumed historicity of Mark. But even if we were to concede that the rabbis were reading the entirety of this servant song about the Messiah, we have to pay attention to how they are reading it, what this says about their idea of the Messiah, and what this particular picture of the Messiah is and what it looks like. But what is really interesting to me is that GE jumps straight from this to, it seems like the expert in Talmudic studies as well as Jewish literature seems to agree with Dr. Carrier. I would very much like to see what Boyarin would say if he were asked to comment directly on what Richard Carrier wrote in his book or on the mythicist thesis. That GE, in order to present this agreement, has to not say that he's a mythicist, not talk about Carrier's work, not mention Kip Davis by name, not mention all the other fringe scholarship that's being marshaled in this case, not mention Carrier's blustering dismissal of basic redactional critical frameworks that have been standard in Talmudic scholarship for decades, and which Boyarin himself deploys in his scholarly work, speaks volumes. And I think it couldn't be said any better than that. So, I've got, do I have any more or is that it? Let's see. I think I've just got, I've just got this little concluding bit from the video. And then, if there's some more, I think there's a couple of super chats still, so I will get to those. All right, let's see. Just put this on the stage here. So this is John's concluding thoughts from his interview with Daniel Boyarin.
Now, it would be really surprising if all of the experts in Talmudic and Jewish literature understood these references to be this way, but Dr. Boyarin doesn't. Now, you would think that one of the most prominent Talmudic scholars would understand what I'm describing here and what I'm saying, but he seems to have no idea. All in all, it seems like the experts in Talmudic and Jewish literature tend to agree with Dr. Carrier's interpretation. This is probably because Dr. Carrier is just citing the expert opinion on these topics. He's not doing any kind of novel analysis of the text, especially because he doesn't seem to have the expertise needed for the analysis of these texts. He appeals to the experts. What this shows is that it's not Dr. Carrier who's out of his depths here. It's actually Dr. Kip Davis who is.
Well,
Professor Terrence.
Sorry. I mean, I'll leave it to you to judge, but I would say that citing a Talmudic text like Babylonian Sanhedrin 98b and then extrapolating from that it, quote, explicitly says the suffering servant who dies in Isaiah 53 is the Messiah, and this Messiah will endure great suffering before his death, or that in Babylonian tractates Sukkah 52:8-b, the Talmud, quote, likewise has a dying rising Christ son of Joseph ideology in it, even saying, quoting Zechariah 12:10, that this Messiah will be pierced to death. I would say that definitely qualifies as novel analysis and is definitely not just citing expert opinion on these topics. This is absolutely why I continue to maintain that Carrier simply does not understand early Jewish literature, and that this misunderstanding prevents him from accurately reading both the sources and the scholarly discussions in them in the secondary literature. So that's all I have to say about that. I've got a few more super chats here. If you want to get any more questions in, get them in now. Let's see. Eddie Morgenstern, thank you for the $10 super chat. What are your thoughts on Mark G. Bilby's restoration of Marcion's gospel and how that allows for the recovery of the lost gospel for the poor among an earlier iteration of Mark? This sounds really interesting. I am sad to say that this is something I don't know anything about. I'm sorry about that. Excuse me. Maybe this was a question for Derek, and if so, I could, excuse me. I got a cough here. So if this is a question for Derek, I could try to pass that on to him. This all sounds very interesting, and I will try to look into it here in the near future. But in any event, and I'm sorry that I can't provide a satisfying answer. I really thank you. I really appreciate the super chat. And I think this is a cool idea, using Marcion's text to attempt to restore or recover stuff from an earlier period, if that is a meaningful enterprise. I'm excited about it, but again, I would have to take a look and see for myself what the actual method being employed is. But thank you very much for the super chat. My good friend Pat Lowinger from Discovering Ancient History with Pat Lowinger is here. Thank you for the $5. Is Boyarin ignoring the theological pressure Jews experienced from Constantine through the 8th century CE, ex novella 146, or Heraclius forced baptisms? I think a case can be made for that. I don't know. It's an important question, definitely. And what Pat's getting at here, I'm hoping people can see what Pat is getting at here, is that Boyarin seems to retain this idea that anything within, or seems to retain this idea of very low pressures on the composition of the actual Talmud and on Jewish theology and ideology in the post-Christian period. I think that's a big mistake. I think that there's important work being undertaken among rabbinic scholars right now, which are showing that there definitely was Christian influence on Jewish ideas after the emergence of Christianity and its growth. I mean, Boyarin does say that there can be some cross pollination. I think he alluded to that in the video. But this is a really important point. Judaism, the Talmud can't just be treated as if this is Judaism that emerged in a vacuum. It's clear that that there were all sorts of pressures going on, which contributed to the development of these traditions. I see that Simone has weighed in here to help. I think Boyarin's position is more the result of the Bavli being composed in Persia, outside the. Oh, that's good. Okay, yeah. Composed outside the Roman Empire. That's an interesting thought, and probably valid. Thank you, Simone. Vesper with a $1.99. Thank you for the super chat. Problems with Jesus being the Messiah ben Joseph. Well, it's I mean, I think it's kind of a backhanded allusion to Jesus. And what we're talking about here is this mention in Sukkah 52 A to B, which is very, very late, demonstrably very, very late. It can't be traced back earlier than the Babylonian Talmud. And it seems to be responding to concerns about what's occurring in the Palestinian Talmud by kind of casting shade on this figure as, the Messiah ben Joseph, right? The two Messiah tradition is a far more ancient one. We know of this tradition from Second Temple Judaism, from the Dead Sea Scrolls, but it's totally different. There is no Messiah ben Joseph in the Dead Sea Scrolls. There is a Messiah ben Aaron. There is a Messiah son of David and a Messiah son of Aaron in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they equate to a messianic priest and a messianic king who would rule together in the eschatological kingdom. But I hope that helps to clarify some things for you. I hope that answers your question. Thank you for the super chat. Mr. Warlight for $5 says, given that the Jews had an earlier concept of Jesus ben Joseph, is there Talmud writing that criticizes the Christian version of that in the gospel? You would have to show me where there is an earlier concept of Jesus ben Joseph. I don't know that there is one. I don't think there is one. If you know of one offhand, then feel free to let me know where it is. Oh, that one was, or let's see. Is there something else coming up here, Mr. Warlight? Let's see. So, yeah, it's not, there isn't an earlier tradition. It's late, as Simone has said, and as I have said in this stream, is probably 6th, 7th century at the earliest, and it's responding to Christianity on some level. So yeah, they're just to bring your original question back here. there is the criticism of Christianity is the Messiah ben Joseph figure, and because he dies. So that's what it is. This is not in any way, shape, or form a pre-Christian idea. But thank you very much for the super chat. So if there's nothing more, it's already 4:30. I think my wife has said something about going to go see Twisters tonight. Has anyone seen it? Is it any good? I heard it was pretty good. But yeah, I think that's what's happening tonight. I don't know what that means, but I hope it's good. What is this? Evan Sachs, I assume Mr. Warlight misspoke and had meant to reference the Messiah concept in general. Yeah, maybe. Let me look at this. If the Jews had an earlier concept of the Messiah and the Christian Messiah in general, or the Messiah in general, is there Talmud writing that criticizes the Christian version of that in the Gospels? And I don't know the literature well enough to say. I believe there is. I believe part of the polemic at work in the Babylonian Talmud is and I actually think this mention of the Nazarene who was executed under Alexander Jannaeus is an example of the kind of polemic that they are drawing against the Christian version of the Messiah. And Simone says that she's got some good references for the development of this stuff. So I look forward to that. I just like the purple. They show up as red here, but I just like the, oh no, they're purple there. That's weird, guys. They're purple on one screen and red on the other. But I just like the purple devil emojis. What can I say? So yeah, that's cool. Diablo Critics is coming back this month, second Sunday, which I believe is the 13th, sorry. So yeah, with that, I'm gonna get out of here. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for bearing with my terrible production skills. This just goes to show how badly I need Vishanti's help, but I appreciate your patience and your support. Yeah, have a great day, everyone, and take care.